Get down! The word tore out of Ethan's throat before his brain could stop it. He was already moving and already airborne across the diner counter when the first shot punched through the window and sprayed glass across the floor. He hit Ava hard, drove her down behind the booth, covered her body with his. The second shot came, then the third. Something burned through his shoulder like a hot iron rod, then his lower back. He didn't move. She was still breathing. He could feel it against his chest. That was enough. If this story hit you in the first 10 seconds, you are exactly who this was made for. Subscribe to this channel right now, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning, because nothing about that night was an accident. Ethan Cole had been invisible for so long that he'd started to believe it was his natural state, not invisible the way shy kids are invisible, or the way quiet people get overlooked at parties. Invisible the way a piece of furniture becomes invisible. The way a cracked window in a diner that nobody owns gets ignored for 3 years because fixing it costs money nobody has. That kind of invisible. The kind that settles into your bones and stops feeling like a problem. He was 17 years old and he worked the late shift at Harlan's Road Stop Diner 6 nights a week. And the only reason he was still enrolled in school at all was because his guidance counselor, Mrs. Delgado, had made him promise not to drop out before his birthday. He hadn't promised her much, but he'd promised her that. The diner sat at the edge of Route 89 in a stretch of Arizona desert that seemed to exist specifically to give truckers somewhere to pee and get bad coffee between Flagstaff and Kingman. The sign outside had a broken H in Harlan's, so it read Harlan's, and nobody had fixed it in the 4 years Ethan had been working there, first as a busboy, then as a cook, then as whatever he needed to be on whatever night Harlan himself called in sick, which was most nights now that Harlan's drinking had moved from a hobby to a lifestyle. Ethan didn't complain. Complaining cost energy he didn't have. His mother, Claire Cole, was 41 years old and sick in the specific grinding way that doesn't kill you quickly, but doesn't let you live easily either. Lupus with complications. Some weeks were okay. Some weeks she couldn't get out of bed, and the medical bills stacked up like a slow avalanche that they both pretended wasn't coming. Ethan worked the late shift because the tips were marginally better after 10 o'clock, when the long-haul drivers came through with cash in their pockets and loneliness in their eyes. He slept 4 hours. He went to school. He came back. He worked. He didn't think too hard about the future because the future felt like a luxury he hadn't earned yet. He was good at the job, not because he loved it, but because he was good at reading people. And reading people was the one skill that survival had hammered into him so completely that it had become instinct. He knew which truckers wanted to talk and which ones wanted silence. He knew which regulars were about to stiff him on the tip before they even looked at the check. He knew when someone was in trouble before they said a word. That was how he first noticed the girl. She came in on a Tuesday, late October, cold front pushing down from the north and making the desert meaner than usual. She was young, his age, maybe a year older, dark hair pulled back, wearing a gray hoodie 2 sizes too big. She sat in the corner booth, the one farthest from the door, with her back pressed against the wall and her eyes on the entrance. She ordered black coffee and a piece of pie she barely touched, and she sat there for 2 hours barely moving. Ethan refilled her coffee 3 times without being asked, the way you do with someone who clearly needs the warmth more than the caffeine. She said thank you each time in a voice so quiet he had to lean in to hear it. She didn't offer her name. She didn't make eye contact for more than 2 seconds. When a truck backfired in the parking lot around midnight, she flinched so hard she knocked her fork off the table, then looked around the diner with the eyes of someone calculating distances and exits. She left before 1 a.m, paid cash, and tipped him $4 on a $7 bill. He didn't think too much about it. Then she came back Thursday, same booth, same position, back to the wall eyes on the door, coffee and pie she didn't finish. She left before the parking lot got too full. Then she came back the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, and then she started coming Thursdays too. By the 3rd week, Ethan had started keeping her corner booth clear after 10 o'clock, even on nights it slowed his tables down. He didn't tell himself why. He just did it the way you do something that makes quiet sense, even when you can't articulate the logic yet. Her name, he eventually learned, was Ava. She told him that on the 4th visit when he brought her coffee without being asked, and she looked up at him and said, You always remember. Most people don't. Remember what he said, that I take it black. You come in enough times it sticks, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm Ava. Ethan, he said. She nodded like she already knew, like she'd been watching him carefully enough to know his name without being told. He didn't ask her any questions. That was the thing about Ethan Cole he understood in some wordless and fundamental way, that some people carry something they're not ready to put down yet. Pushing them made them leave. Giving them space made them stay. And staying meant they were safe, at least for now. He didn't know where that instinct came from. He thought maybe it came from his mother, who had good days and bad days and never needed him to fix anything just to be there. So he gave Ava her corner booth and her black coffee and her space, and every visit she gave him a little more. It happened in pieces, the way trust always does. She told him she was from Nevada originally, but that felt like a distant fact, something that described a person who no longer quite existed. She'd been in Arizona for a few months. She was staying nearby. She was vague about where. She didn't go to school. She said she was taking some time. She never said from what, but she laughed at his jokes, which surprised him because she didn't seem like someone who laughed easily. It wasn't a big laugh, more of a quick, startled sound, like she'd been caught off guard by something. He started trying to get it out of her on purpose, telling her about the particularly deranged regulars, the old trucker who sang Merle Haggard to his steering wheel, the couple who came in every Friday and ordered identical meals, but sat in furious silence the entire time. They've been coming here 3 years, Ethan told her one night. I have never once heard either of them say a word to each other. Maybe they ran out of things to say. 3 years ago. That got the laugh, the startled, surprised one. He liked it. He tried not to think about why he liked it. Her eyes, he noticed, were always moving. She tracked the door every time it opened. She knew the license plates of the trucks in the lot. She sat facing outward, and she always knew where the exits were. He'd worked enough late shifts to recognize the specific body language of someone who felt genuinely unsafe. The hyper-alertness, the controlled stillness that was actually the opposite of stillness. It was readiness, coiled and waiting. He didn't ask, but he started paying attention to the parking lot in a way he hadn't before. 3 weeks in, on a cold Thursday night, when the diner was nearly empty and the wind was throwing grit against the windows, she said something that changed the texture of everything between them. She'd been quiet for almost an hour, nursing her second coffee, and Ethan had been doing prep work at the end of the counter, close enough to be there if she needed something, far enough not to crowd her. And she said, without looking up from the table, "Do you ever feel like you're waiting for something bad to happen?" He set down the knife he was using to section limes, turned to look at her. "Yeah," he said honestly, "pretty much all the time." She looked up then. "How do you deal with it?" "I keep moving," he said. "If I stop moving, I think too much." She was quiet for a moment, turning her coffee cup in slow circles. "What if you can't keep moving?" He leaned against the counter and looked at her directly. "Then you find something still enough to hold on to." She stared at him. Something passed across her face that he couldn't name, something between relief and grief. Then she looked back down at the table and said very quietly, "I'm working on that." He didn't say anything else. He just went back to his limes. But something had shifted, and they both felt it. The 4th week, she came in on a Monday, which she'd never done before. Ethan clocked it the second she walked in. She was tenser than usual, moving faster. Her eyes did 3 full sweeps of the room before she even reached the booth. She sat down, and her hands were on the table fingers, flat the way you press them on when you're trying to stop them from shaking. He brought her coffee without being asked. She didn't say thank you. She looked up at him and said, "Is there a back way out of here?" He kept his face calm. Through the kitchen, past the walk-in. Door opens into the lot by the dumpsters. "How many people are in the parking lot right now?" 3 trucks, 1 car, Arizona plate's been there about 20 minutes. Doesn't belong to any of the regulars. She looked at him. Something in her expression, like she hadn't expected him to know that. Like she hadn't expected anyone to pay that much attention. "Do you remember that from walking in?" she asked. "I noticed things," he said. She stared at him for another moment. Then she said, "I might need to leave fast. Is that okay?" I'll leave the kitchen door unlocked, he said. Just push through. She nodded. Her hands were still flat on the table, but the fingers had relaxed slightly. You're not going to ask me why. Not unless you want to tell me. She shook her head. Okay then, Ethan said, and went back to work. That night, around 11:30, the car with Arizona plates was still in the lot. Ethan had been watching it through the window every time he passed. No one got out. No one got in. Just sitting there with the engine off. At 11:45, Ava went to the bathroom. While she was gone, Ethan walked to the window and looked at the car again. Something about the angle was wrong. Something about the way it was positioned, not in a parking spot, it's just slightly off angled toward the entrance. He went back to the counter, picked up his phone, looked at it, didn't call anyone, didn't know who to call. He went to the kitchen door and unlocked it the way he'd promised. At midnight, Ava came back from the bathroom, and for about 45 seconds, everything was perfectly normal. The handful of remaining customers ate their food. The ceiling fan turned slowly. A country station played low from the radio behind the counter. Then the car in the parking lot turned its lights on. Ethan saw it through the window. Watched it pull forward, slightly repositioning. And then the passenger side window went down, and a rifle barrel appeared. Buster! He didn't think. That was the thing he would try to explain later, and fail to explain adequately. There was no thought. The gap between seeing the rifle and moving was zero. His brain simply issued no instruction because it had already been overridden by something older than thought, something that operated at the level of nerve and muscle, in the specific kind of love that doesn't announce itself. He launched himself over the counter. He hit it hard with his hip, barely cleared. It was already screaming before he landed. Get down, everybody, get down! And he crossed the diner floor in 4 strides and hit Ava with enough force to drive her down off the bench and below the table in one movement, covering her with his body, his chest against her back, his arms wrapped around her, his face pressed into the back of her neck. The first shot came half a second later. It took out the window in an explosion of glass and cold air, and the sharp, flat sound of a high-caliber rifle that Ethan felt in his teeth. The booth above them took a hit. Wood splinters rained down. Somebody in the back screamed a high, terrible sound. He held her tighter. The second shot came. He felt it. Not pain, not immediately, just impact, like being hit with a hammer in the left shoulder, and the force of it drove him harder into her. And he thought clearly and calmly, don't move. She has to breathe. As long as she's breathing, don't move. The third shot hit lower, his back left side below the shoulder blade. That one had something sharp and white in it. His vision went sideways for a moment, and he gripped the floor with his free hand and pressed every ounce of himself over her, and he thought, still breathing. I can feel it. Still breathing. Tires screamed outside. The car was leaving. Ethan lay still. He could hear her breathing against him. Rapid, shallow, terrified, but breathing. He could hear his own heartbeat somewhere far below the pain, which was arriving now in long, rolling waves that were hard to think through. He heard voices, the remaining customers. Someone was calling 911. Someone else was yelling his name. That was Donna the cook in the back. That was Donna's voice breaking open. He still didn't move. Ethan, Ava's voice muffled under him. Ethan, are you? Don't move, he said. His voice came out steady, which surprised him. Ethan, you're bleeding. I know. You have to let me. Not yet. He raised his head slightly. The car was gone. The window was a ruin. Nobody was moving outside. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, we're moving now. He pushed himself off her, which was harder than it should have been. His left arm wasn't responding correctly. He got himself upright against the base of the booth and looked down at his shoulder and didn't look at it again. Ava turned around and saw him, and her face went to something that wasn't quite a color anymore. Oh, God, she whispered. I'm okay, he said. It wasn't entirely true. You're not okay, She reached for him, pressed her hands against his shoulder, and her hands came away red, and she looked at them like she couldn't understand what she was seeing. Ethan. Donna already called 911, he said calmly. The car is gone. You're not hurt. She shook her head. Her hands were shaking violently now, not the contained trembling of. Before this was the full body shaking of someone whose control had completely dissolved. Look at me, Ethan said. She looked at him. You're okay, I'm okay, it's over for right now. "This is my fault," she said. Her voice was breaking apart. "This is my fault. They were—" "Stop," he said. "Not now. We can do all of that later." He leaned back against the booth. The pain was becoming very large and very detailed, and he focused on breathing evenly because that seemed like the most useful thing he could do. She was still pressing her hands against his shoulder. He let her. Outside, somewhere in the distance, he could hear sirens starting. Oh, damn. The next few hours fragmented into pieces that didn't entirely connect. Paramedics, bright lights, questions he answered as briefly as possible. The shoulder wound was a through and through. The bullet had passed through the meat of his upper arm and left a clean channel that looked dramatic but had missed the bone. The back wound was worse. It had lodged, and they were telling him things he was having difficulty tracking because the adrenaline was finally leaving his body and the pain was filling in every space it vacated. 2 shots, both from a rifle, through a diner window. The sheriff's deputy who took his statement was a man named Briggs Heavyset Impatient, the kind of cop who asked questions and wrote down the answers without particularly listening to either. Ethan told him about the car, the plate, the rifle barrel, and the window. Briggs wrote it down, said they'd look into it. Ethan didn't tell him about Ava. He wasn't sure why he made that decision in the moment. It wasn't calculated. It came from the same place the jump had come from, something that didn't use words. Ava had been taken into another room. A female deputy was with her. Ethan could see the doorway from his position on the gurney, and he watched it until they started working on him in earnest, and then he focused on the ceiling tiles and breathed. His mother was going to hear about this. That was the thought that pierced everything else. She was going to hear about this, and it was going to frighten her in a way she couldn't afford physically or otherwise, and there was nothing he could do about that right now except try to minimize the damage later. He closed his eyes. He was in surgery. They called it a procedure, minimizing it, which he appreciated, for just over an hour to remove the bullet from his back. When he came out the other side of the anesthesia, the room was different, quieter. There was a window with thin gray pre-dawn light coming through it, and there was a man sitting in the chair by the bed who had not been there before. He was large, not in the way big people are sometimes soft, in the specific way that meant he had always been large and had never learned to make himself smaller to accommodate other people's comfort. He was maybe 50, maybe older. It was hard to read because he had the kind of face that had gone through things that compressed time. Gray in the beard and the hair, hands that were folded in his lap with a deliberate stillness, the kind that wasn't natural but had been practiced into something that looked natural. He was wearing a leather vest. On the back of it, Ethan could see a patch. He couldn't read it from this angle, but he knew the shape of it, had seen it before in passing on the highway, at rest stops in the periphery of a world that he'd always understood was separate from his own. The man looked at him. Ethan looked at him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then the man said in a voice that matched everything else about him, "You covered my daughter with your body." Ethan didn't say anything. "Took 2 rounds, the man continued. His voice was even, deliberate, like each word had been examined before being spoken. "And you didn't move until the car was gone." "She was still breathing," Ethan said. His voice came out rougher than he expected. "That was the only thing I was thinking about." Something moved across the man's face. Not quite emotion, more like the acknowledgement that emotion was present, somewhere being held at a controlled distance. "My name is Victor Sinclair," the man said. Ethan waited. "I'm the vice president of the Arizona chapter of the Hells Angels." There it was. Ethan let that land, let it sit. Found somewhat to his own surprise that it didn't change anything fundamental. The girl had been scared. He'd known she was scared. He'd jumped because she was scared. That sequence was complete regardless of what came after it. "How is she?" he said. Victor looked at him for a long moment. "Shaken. No injuries." A pause. "She's asking about you." "Tell her I'm fine." "I will." Victor unfolded his hands, placed them on his knees. "Ethan Cole, 17, Mother Claire on disability lupus complications. You've been working this diner 4 years, no father in the picture since you were 8. Ethan kept his expression still. "You already knew about me. I knew about everyone Ava spoke to, every location she went to, every face she saw regularly." A pause. "I had people watching her." "But not close enough," Ethan said quietly. Victor absorbed that without flinching. "No, not close enough." A silence opened between them. Outside the window, the gray light was shifting towards something warmer. Who were they? Ethan said. An organization called the Reapers, Victor said. They're competing for territory. Border operations people, product money. Ava knows things about their operation. Things she was told by someone who shouldn't have told her. He stopped there, like he'd already said more than he intended. So she's been running, Ethan said, for 6 months. Victor's voice didn't change, but something underneath it did something that Ethan recognized because he knew what it sounded like when someone was holding a weight they refused to put down in front of other people. Moving between locations. Safe houses. We had people near her but not close enough. He paused again. She went to your diner because it felt ordinary. She said ordinary felt safer than anything I could give her. Ethan didn't answer right away. He thought about the 4 weeks, the corner booth, the way she held her coffee cup, the startled laugh. She wasn't wrong, he said finally. Victor studied him. No, she wasn't wrong about a lot of things. He stood. He was even larger standing. You're going to need time to recover. Your mother has been contacted. She's on her way. The diner is a crime scene, which means you won't be working for a while. He reached into the pocket of his vest and set something on the edge of the bed without quite handing it to Ethan, a card plain white with a number on it. When you're ready to leave here, call that number. We'll have people bring you somewhere safe. Ethan looked at the card. Why pas though? Because you're in this now, Victor said, whether you chose it or not. He moved toward the door, then stopped without turning around. My daughter saved your life once too. You just don't know it yet. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? But Victor was already through the door. His mother arrived at 8 in the morning. Claire Cole was thin in the way illness makes you thin, not fragile exactly, but whittled down, essentialized like all the non-essential parts had been gradually removed until only the core remained. She walked into the room and she saw him, and she didn't cry, which was what he'd been afraid of, what would have broken something open in him that he wasn't sure he could put back together. She sat down in the chair by the bed and took his hand and said, Tell me you're okay. I'm okay, he said. Tell me you're not lying. I'm banged up, he said. 2 shots. One's already through and the other one's out now. I'm going to be sore for a while. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. He'd always felt that she could see further into him than he was entirely comfortable with, something about the way chronic illness had clarified her, stripped away the distraction of easier days, and left her with an acute clarity of attention. Who was the girl, she said. He blinked. What girl? The one you jumped on? Don't tell me there wasn't a girl. I know you. He was quiet for a moment. Her name is Ava. Are you in love with her, Mom? I barely know her, he said. She was scared. She'd been scared every time she came in. I saw the gun and I moved. His mother studied him. Something in her face went soft in a way that also looked like it hurt. That's such a you thing to do, she said quietly. I'm so angry at you. I know. And I'm so proud of you I don't know what to do with it. He looked away from her face because it was too much all of that at once. The diner's closed for a while. I'll find something else. And there's a possibility we might need to stay somewhere different for a bit. It's complicated. How complicated? He thought about Victor Sinclair sitting in the chair before dawn, folding his massive hands in his lap, talking about the Reapers and border operations in the same measured tone that a financial advisor might use to discuss retirement portfolios. He thought about the card on the nightstand. I'll explain everything, he said, just not right now. His mother squeezed his hand once firmly, the way she'd always done when she was registering a protest she didn't intend to push. Okay, she said, not right now. Victim. He went home 2 days later. The hospital had been careful and efficient and impersonal in the way hospitals always are. A nurse had explained the follow-up care, given him a prescription, told him not to lift anything above his head for 6 weeks. He had nodded and thanked her, and thought about the fact that he would not be lifting anything above his head at the diner since the diner was currently wrapped in crime scene tape. His bike was in the parking lot of the hospital. His bicycle, the old Trek he'd been riding for 3 years, which had survived 2 winters in a collision with an inattentive SUV and several flat tires which he had repaired with steadily diminishing amounts of the original tube, was leaning against the rack outside the entrance where he'd left it before his shift 2 nights ago. Or what was left of it. The frame had been bent double. The wheels had been removed and flattened. The handlebars were twisted at an angle that required deliberate force. Someone had destroyed it with intent, not vandalism, which was careless, but this, which was methodical. It had been done to send a message. Ethan stood in front of it for a long moment in the cold morning air. He pulled out his phone and called the number on Victor's card. A voice answered immediately, not Victor, but a younger man, brisk and organized. "Mr. Cole, we've been expecting your call. Is there anything you need right now?" "Someone destroyed my bicycle," Ethan said. "I need to get my mother home." 20 minutes later, a dark truck pulled up to the hospital entrance. The driver was a man in his 40s, quiet and professional, who didn't offer his name, but held the door for Ethan's mother without being asked. Ethan helped her into the back seat and climbed in after her, and they drove away from the hospital in silence. And Ethan didn't look back at the wreckage of his bicycle, but he felt it behind him the whole way. The letter arrived that evening. It was on the doorstep of their house, not in the mailbox on the doorstep. An envelope unsealed with nothing on the outside. Inside was a single piece of paper with 2 lines printed on it. "You should have stayed on your side of the counter. Next time we won't miss." Ethan read it, folded it, put it in his pocket. He went inside and helped his mother with dinner, which was soup from a can, because neither of them was capable of more than that right now. He washed the dishes. He sat at the kitchen table and did 45 minutes of homework because he had a test on Friday and he'd promised Mrs. Delgado. And then he went to the back of the house and stood at the window and called Victor Sinclair. "They left a letter at the house," he said. "I know," Victor said. "We found it before you did." Ethan absorbed that. "You're watching the house." "Since yesterday morning." "My mother is also being watched." "She's safe, Ethan." The use of his first name, unhurried and deliberate, registered as something between reassurance and an assertion of terms. "This is what I need you to understand. The Reapers don't leave witnesses alone. They couldn't get Ava, which means they're going to work outward to you, to your home, to the people you care about. Not because they want to hurt them specifically, but because they want to hurt you and you to disappear and the whole event to stop existing." "Why would they think I matter?" Ethan said. "I'm a diner worker." "You're a diner worker who absorbed 2 shots and didn't move," Victor said, "and who has now spoken with me for longer than most people are comfortable speaking with me. That makes you something, whether you wanted to be or not." The night outside the window was very dark and very quiet. The wind moved something in the yard. "What do you want from me?" Ethan asked. "Nothing," Victor said. "I want to keep you alive, and I want you to let me." Ethan thought about this for a moment, about his mother eating soup from a can, about the bent bicycle in the hospital parking lot, about the letter in his pocket, about Ava pressing her hands against his shoulder in a ruined diner, her face the color of paper. "Okay," he said. "Okay," Victor said. "My people will be there tomorrow morning. Pack for a few days." Don't. He didn't sleep much. What he did instead was sit at the kitchen table with the letter and think. He thought about the Reapers, which was a name that conjured a specific kind of organizational violence. Not random, not impulsive, but structured. Patient. The kind of organization that destroyed bicycles methodically and left letters on doorsteps instead of in mailboxes because the doorstep was more personal, more intimate, more clearly a declaration of access. They had been in the diner parking lot for at least an hour before the shooting. Someone had told them where Ava was. She'd been using the diner for weeks, moving, carefully staying off the obvious grid, but someone had tracked her there. That meant either she'd been followed at some point, or there was a leak somewhere closer to Victor's circle. He filed that thought away without knowing why. He thought about what Victor had said. "My daughter saved your life once too. You just don't know it yet." He turned that over and over, couldn't find the shape of it yet. At some point before dawn, he got up and looked in on his mother, who was asleep in her room, breathing in the particular measured way of someone whose body negotiated its rest carefully. He watched her for a minute the way you watch something you love when you've been reminded how quickly everything can change. Then he went back to the kitchen and made coffee and sat with it until the light changed. Victor's people arrived at 8 in the morning. There were 2 of them, the same quiet driver who'd taken them home from the hospital, and a woman named Dale who wore a field jacket and carried herself with the specific ease of someone who had assessed threats professionally for long enough that it had become ambient. She shook Ethan's hand, shook his mother's hand, and told them in plain, direct language what was going to happen. They would be moved to a safe location for a period of time. that was currently unspecified. Their home would be watched, and they should pack what they needed. Claire looked at her and said, "I have a medical schedule. I can't miss my Tuesday appointments." "We'll take you," Dale said without hesitating. "We'll work around it." Claire looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back at her. Something passed between them that was mostly his apology and mostly her forgiveness. 20 minutes, Claire said and went to pack. On the way out, Ethan stopped in the doorway and looked at the house. His bike was still in the hospital lot. There was a letter in his pocket. His shoulder ached in a way that made the whole left side of his body feel slightly unreliable. He stepped out and pulled the door closed behind him. The safe location was a house 40 minutes outside the city. Clean, plain, functional, not a place anyone was meant to live long-term, but a place that could serve that function without protest. There were 3 other people already in the house, 2 of Victor's men, who introduced themselves and then went back to whatever they had been doing, and Ava. She was in the kitchen when Ethan arrived. She heard him come in and she turned from the window, and for a moment neither of them said anything. She looked like she hadn't slept in 2 days, which was probably true. She was still wearing the oversized gray hoodie, the same one from the diner, and she had her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, the way you hold something warm when you need it to anchor you. "Hi," she said. Her voice was rough. "Hi," he said. "How's your shoulder?" "Annoying. How are you?" "I don't have a good answer to that," she said. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table. After a moment, she sat down across from him. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know that doesn't—" "Stop," he said. He said it gently but clearly. "We already talked about this in the diner. It doesn't help you, and it doesn't help me." She looked at him. Her eyes were red-edged. "I could have left the diner. I knew they were getting closer. I should have left earlier." "You can spend a lot of time in that direction," he said. "I've been there. It doesn't go anywhere good." "You've been in situations like this before." "Not like this, but the logic is the same." He looked at the table. "My mom was really sick 3 years ago. I spent a year going back through every choice I'd made, trying to find the one that had caused it. The thing I'd done wrong, the thing I should have seen. There wasn't one. Sometimes things happen and they're not your fault, and they're also not random, and there's no clean line to draw between those 2 facts." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You were surprisingly thoughtful for someone who just threw himself in front of a rifle." "Didn't throw myself, jumped." "What's the difference?" "Throwing yourself implies a decision," he said. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. It had too many things in it at once. "You really didn't think about it," she said. "At all. By the time I thought anything, I'd already landed," he said. She exhaled slowly, looked down at her coffee. "My father thinks you're extraordinary," she said. "That's a word he basically never uses about anyone." "He barely knows me." "He knew enough," she said. "He runs a background check on everyone who interacts with me. He knew more about you than you probably know about yourself." She paused. "He respects you. That's also something he basically never does without a reason." Ethan sat with it for a moment. "What kind of man is he?" he asked carefully. She was quiet. "He's complicated. He lives by a code that doesn't look like anything the outside world would recognize. He's done things I don't think I'm supposed to know about. But he loves me more than anything in his life, and he would burn the world down for me if I asked him to." She stopped. "He also knows that I'd never ask him to." "But you didn't go to him when the Reapers started," Ethan said. "You ran on your own." She looked up. Something in her face tightened. "I went to him first. He wanted to go to war immediately. Full force. No conversation, no strategy, just fire back with everything he had." She paused. "I knew what that meant. I knew how many people get caught in that kind of fire, and I knew he'd do it for me without a second thought, and I couldn't let that happen because of me." Her voice dropped. "So I ran instead. I thought I could stay small enough, invisible enough until I figured out another way." "But they found you anyway," Ethan said. "They found me anyway," she said. A silence settled between them that wasn't uncomfortable. The house was quiet except for the sound of the men in the other room, and distantly his mother's voice asking Dale a question about the medication schedule. "Your mother," Ava said. "I saw her come in. She's stronger than she looks," Ethan said. "She's always been stronger than she looks. She looked at you when she came in, the way she looked at you." Ava stopped. Her voice had changed slightly. "I don't have a mother. She died when I was 4. So I noticed the way other people's mothers look at them. Ethan didn't know what to do with that, so he didn't try to do anything with it. He just said, "I'm sorry about your mother." "It was a long time ago," she said, but the way she said it made clear that it was also not long ago at all. "What was she like?" he asked. Ava looked at him, surprised again like she'd been caught off guard. "You're asking me that? You don't have to answer." She looked back at her coffee. "She was kind," she said after a moment. "My dad talks about her sometimes. He talks about her like she was the only thing in his whole life that made complete sense." She paused. "He became what he is after she died. Not because of it, he was already in this world, but she kept him from certain things. And when she was gone, those things were possible again." Ethan thought about that, about Victor Sinclair with his folded hands and his deliberate voice and his absolute certainty sitting in the hospital chair before dawn. "He loves you the way he loved her," Ethan said. Ava was very still for a moment. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I know." And for the first time since he'd known her, sitting in that safe house kitchen with her hands around a coffee mug and her eyes a little red and the morning light coming through the window, she didn't look like she was watching for exits. She looked like she had somewhere to be. That afternoon, Victor arrived. He came in the way he moved everywhere, like he had already made peace with whatever might happen next and was simply walking through the aftermath of that decision. He sat down across from Ethan at the kitchen table, and Dale and the two men made themselves scarce in that particular way that professional people do when the principal in a room requires space. Victor looked at Ethan for a long moment. Then he said, "The Reapers are going to come again." "I know," Ethan said. "They'll come for Ava, and they'll come for you now because you're connected to her and because leaving witnesses is not something they do." He paused. "We're not going to let that happen. But I want you to understand the full shape of the situation before you decide anything." "Decide what?" Ethan said. "Decide how involved you want to be," Victor said. "I can have you and your mother move somewhere completely separate. New location, professional security sustained until we close this situation. You would have no contact with Ava, no contact with my organization. You would be protected, and when it was over, you would go back to your life." Ethan waited. Or Victor said, "You stay involved. You know what Ava knows. You know the timeline. You saw the car, the rifle, the positioning. There may be things you can offer that matter." A pause. "And you matter to Ava," which I am acknowledging because it is a fact and I deal in facts. Ethan looked at him. "What does she want?" Victor's expression shifted slightly. "She said to ask you. She said it was your choice and she'd accept whichever one you made." Ethan thought about it, thought about the bicycle, the letter, his mother asking Dale about the medication schedule. Ava's hands flat on the table in the diner. "I'm not leaving," he said. Victor studied him. "You understand what staying in means?" "I understand it's dangerous," Ethan said. "I was already shot. It's already dangerous. It gets more dangerous." "Tell me about the Reapers," Ethan said. "Tell me what we're actually dealing with." Victor looked at him for a long moment. Then he pulled his chair forward and placed both hands on the table and began to talk. And Ethan Cole, who had been invisible for so long that he'd stopped feeling the weight of it, leaned forward and listened. Victor Sinclair did not speak the way most powerful men speak. He didn't posture. He didn't layer his words with implication or let silence do the work of intimidation. He spoke the way someone speaks when they have long since stopped needing anyone to be impressed by them, flat, direct, each sentence its own complete fact. "The Reapers started as a distribution network," Victor said. "Drugs mostly. Arizona, New Mexico, a corridor into California. About 8 years ago, a man named Kane Mercer took over their operation and expanded it. Drugs became one piece. The larger piece became people." Ethan kept his face still. "Trafficking. Border runs, mostly from Mexico, some from Central America. They move people in containers and trucks in the backs of vans. They charge families everything they have and deliver about half of them alive." Victor's voice didn't change on that last sentence. Not because he didn't care. Ethan was already learning to read the difference between Victor not caring and Victor having already processed something into a form he could carry. "The Reapers now control 3 crossing points. They've got connections inside BP 2 sheriff's departments, and at least one federal prosecutor's office, which is why going to law enforcement directly has never been a viable option. But you know all of this, Ethan said. Your organization has been watching them. For 2 years, Victor said, we've been building a picture, identifying their structure, their personnel, their financial channels. He paused. Ava came into it because of a man named Derek Holt. He was one of Kane Mercer's lieutenants. He was also trying to get out, and he made the mistake of trusting the wrong person to help him. Who did he trust? Someone in my organization, Victor said. And there it was, not anger in his voice, but something harder. Derek Holt came to one of my people looking for a path out of the Reapers. He had documentation. Financial records, operational maps, names of the corrupt officials. Everything we'd been trying to build for 2 years, he had it ready to hand over. He stopped. Instead of coming to me directly, my man went to Ava. He'd known her since she was a child. He thought he was keeping her safe by keeping me out of it. He told her everything Holt had told him. Ethan understood then. She became the witness. She became the witness before she even knew she was one. The Reapers found out Holt was talking. They killed him inside of 48 hours, and then they came looking for whoever he'd spoken to. Victor's jaw tightened fractionally. My man didn't survive that inquiry either. The weight of that settled in the room. So Ava has information in her head that can dismantle their entire operation, Ethan said. Names, connections, financial trails. Enough to take down Kane Mercer and expose the corrupt officials protecting him, Victor said. Enough to collapse the crossing operations. Enough to put people away for decades. He looked at Ethan levelly, which is why they cannot allow her to speak to anyone with the authority to act on what she knows. And why you haven't just taken Mercer yourself, Ethan said. Because if you move on him directly without legal cover, the corrupt officials bury it. You need her testimony in the right hands. Victor looked at him with something that might have been the beginning of respect. For a 17-year-old diner worker, you follow quickly. I've had a lot of practice reading situations where the official story isn't the real one, Ethan said. Growing up the way I did, you learn. Victor nodded once. Stones. We've been trying to find a safe channel. Someone in federal law enforcement we can trust without exposing Ava to the people inside that system who are already compromised. He spread his hands on the table, not a gesture of helplessness, but of a man laying out a problem in its full dimensions. We're close. But close means Ava is still a target in the meantime, and last night confirmed that the Reapers are willing to escalate. Ethan thought for a moment, then he said, the person in your organization, the one who told Ava everything, you said he didn't survive. Correct. How did the Reapers find him so fast if Derek Holt came to him quietly if there was no obvious trail? Victor was still, very still. That's the question I've been sitting with for 6 months. There's another leak, Ethan said. Not the same person. Someone else. Someone who knew Holt was talking to your man and passed that to the Reapers. Victor didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. He looked at Ethan with the particular expression of a man who has already arrived at a conclusion he doesn't like and is watching someone else arrive at the same place in real time. How did the Reapers know Ava was at my diner last night? Ethan pressed. She'd been careful. She moved around. Your people were watching her, but not close. She said she felt safer at my diner than at any of your safe houses. So how did they track her there? The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Someone told them, Ethan said. Someone who knew where she was. Victor said very quietly, yes. And that someone is still inside your organization. Yes. Ethan leaned back in his chair. His shoulder ached. His back ached. He was 17 years old and 2 days out of surgery, and he was sitting across from the vice president of the Hells Angels discussing an internal intelligence breach, and the strange thing was that none of it felt outside his range. It felt like a harder version of something he'd always been doing, reading the room, finding the gap between the surface story and the real one, figuring out who to trust when the obvious answers were wrong. You don't know who it is, Ethan said. I have suspicions, Victor said. I don't have certainty. And moving on suspicion in a situation this tight gets people killed. Ethan looked at him directly. Does Ava know? She knows there's a leak. She doesn't know I've narrowed it. He paused. She doesn't know some of the things I'm about to tell you. Then why are you telling me? Victor was quiet for a moment, long enough that Ethan felt the weight of the question reverse, like Victor wasn't deciding whether to answer, but deciding how to say something he'd already decided to say. Because you made a decision in that diner in about half a second, Victor said finally, and the decision was right. Not tactically right. I've had men with 20 years of training make the wrong call in situations simpler than that. I mean, right in the way that comes from something you can't teach, from knowing what matters and moving toward it without hesitation. He paused. I've been looking for someone with that quality for 6 months. I didn't expect to find him behind a diner counter. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. So he said, "What do you need from me?" And Victor told him. What Victor needed was simple in concept and complicated in every practical dimension. He needed Ethan to be what he already was. The Reapers were watching Victor's organization. They were watching his known associates, his chapter members, his safe houses. They were cataloging every face that moved in and out of his orbit. They had spent 6 months building a complete picture of his world, which meant they had a complete picture of every piece he might move. What they didn't have a picture of was Ethan Cole, a diner worker from a stretch of highway. 17 broke nobody's son in the world that mattered to them. He had been inside the incident which put him on their radar, but he was also in their calculation a civilian casualty, someone to be warned off with a destroyed bicycle and a letter on a doorstep. They hadn't yet realized what Victor already knew. "You can move in ways I can't," Victor said. "You can be seen in places where my people being seen would register as threat. The school, the hospital, the diner neighborhood, public space, ordinary space." "You want me to gather information," Ethan said. "I want you to be Ethan Cole," Victor said. "I want you to be exactly what you are. I want you to go back to school, go about your life within the perimeter of what's safe, and I want you to be aware. Watch for things that don't belong, people who don't fit, vehicles you see more than once in different places. You want a second set of eyes that they're not watching," Ethan said. "I want eyes they think are irrelevant," Victor said. "There's a difference." Ethan absorbed this. "And if I see something, you call Dale, only Dale, nobody else in my organization, nobody who has been in proximity to Ava for more than the last 2 weeks. He paused. "That's the perimeter of the trust I can currently guarantee." There it was again, the leak drawing an invisible circle around everyone outside it. "What about Ava?" Ethan asked. "Where does she go while I'm being Ethan Cole?" "She stays here," Victor said, "with people I trust completely." He looked at the table, which is a smaller group than it was 6 months ago. Ethan nodded slowly, looked at his hands for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going to need a phone that isn't my current phone." Victor almost smiled. It was a very small almost. "Already arranged." He went back to school on Thursday. 2 days after surgery, 6 days after the shooting, he walked into Ridgeway High School in his regular clothes with his shoulder wrapped under his shirt and his back stiff in the way that made every step register as a mild argument with his own body. He had a new phone in his pocket, prepaid nondescript, and his regular phone, and he kept them in separate pockets so he could reach each one without looking. The school already knew. Small towns talk, and Route 89 was small enough that a shooting at a roadside diner made it into the local news, and from there into the hallways within 12 hours. People looked at him, some of them said things, the usual things, the things people say when something violent has touched someone they know tangentially, and they want the proximity of it without the cost. He said thanks and moved through and found his locker and Mrs. Delgado waiting outside of it. She was a compact woman in her 50s who had been a school counselor for 22 years and had the specific emotional density of someone who had sat with every variety of teenage crisis long enough to stop being surprised by any of them. She looked at him and said, "How are you actually doing?" "I'm managing," he said. "That's not the same as doing well." "No," he agreed, "it's not." She looked at him with the careful attention she reserved for the students she was most worried about. "Is there anything you need from this school?" "I might miss some time," he said. "I'm trying to make sure I'm not behind." "That's the least of my concerns," she said. "Ethan," she stopped, chose her next words. "If something is happening that you need help with, not school help, real help, there are people I can connect you to." "I know," he said. "Thank you, I'm okay." She held his gaze for another second, then nodded. "Come see me if that changes." He went to his first class. He sat in his usual seat. He paid attention, which wasn't difficult because paying attention was a reflex by now, not a choice. And the whole time he was also watching. The parking lot from the window, the hallway outside the door, the cars that came and went. On the second day, he noticed the gray sedan. It was parked across from the school entrance, not in the school lot across the street on the residential block, angled toward the entrance. He saw it at 7:40 in the morning and again at 3:15 when school let it out. Different driver each time, he was sure of that because the second one had a different silhouette, different posture. Same car. He wrote down the plate number in his regular notebook between chemistry equations and called Dale at 6 that evening. Gray Honda Accord, he said, reading the plate. 2 drivers, morning and afternoon, watching the school entrance. Dale's voice was completely flat. Don't change your routine. Keep noting. Don't approach. I know, he said. Good. A pause. You're doing well, Ethan. He hung up and made dinner for his mother, who was managing the adjustment to the new house, with the pragmatic adaptability of someone who had long since learned that the shape of a place mattered less than the people inside it. She asked him about school. He told her about the chemistry test, which he thought he'd passed. He didn't mention the gray sedan. He thought about what constituted protection versus burden, and whether the line between them was sometimes purely about the information you chose to carry alone. On the 4th day back, Ava called him. She was using a secure line Dale had set up. Her voice sounded different through its slightly compressed, the emotional texture flattened by whatever encryption made it safe. I'm losing my mind in this house, she said without preamble. How many rooms, he said. 5. I've been living in a 2-bedroom with my mother for 9 years, he said. I have limited sympathy. The startled laugh, even through the compression, he recognized it. How's school, she asked. Weird. Everyone knows what happened without knowing anything about it, which means they've all filled in the gaps with whatever makes the best story. He paused. Apparently, I fought off 4 armed men with a fire extinguisher. Did you at least keep the extinguisher? Left it at the scene. Rookie mistake. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said carefully, there's a gray sedan watching the school. I reported it to Dale. She went still on the other end. He could feel it in the silence. How long since I went back? They're making sure you haven't gone to anyone official, she said. Verifying you're still contained. That's what I figured. He paused. They think you're not at my school. Good, she said. Let them think that. Ava. He chose his words carefully. How much do you know about who in your father's organization is trusted right now? A pause. He hasn't told me everything. Has he told you about the second leak? Silence. A longer one. What second leak? So Victor hadn't told her that. Ethan sat with that for a moment, recalibrating. Victor had told him the boy he'd known for 4 days, something he hadn't told his own daughter. He tried to figure out what that meant and arrived at 2 possible explanations. Either Victor trusted Ethan with information he didn't trust Ava to handle without acting on it, or Victor was testing Ethan's discretion by telling him something sensitive and watching what he did with it. Ask your father, Ethan said. Ethan, I'm not keeping things from you, he said. I'm saying it's a conversation you should have with him directly. I'll be honest with you about anything that's mine to be honest about. That one is his. Another pause. You're frustrating, she said. You're also frustrated because you know I'm right, he said. She exhaled. Yeah, I know you're right. A beat. I'm going to call him tonight. Good. Ethan, her voice shifted. Be careful at school tomorrow. He noticed what she didn't say. She didn't say be careful in general. She said at school tomorrow, specifically. Why tomorrow? I don't know exactly. I have a feeling, she paused. I've been running long enough that I've learned to respect feelings. Okay, he said. He didn't argue with it. He'd learned to respect the calibrated instincts of someone who had survived 6 months on awareness alone. Thank you, she said, for checking on me. You called me, he pointed out. That counts, says checking, she said. Son, the next morning the gray sedan wasn't there. That was almost worse. Ethan stood outside the school entrance for 30 seconds longer than he needed to, doing a full sweep of every visible vehicle. Nothing that matched, nothing parked at the wrong angle. He went inside, found his locker, went to class. Texted the new phone's number to Dale Gray, car gone today. Change or pulled, Dale responded 11 minutes later. Change. New vehicle incoming, couldn't identify yet. Eyes open. He went through 3 classes and arrived at lunch and was halfway through a turkey sandwich when a boy he barely knew sat down across from him. His name was Marcus, a year ahead of Ethan, one of those students who was peripherally everywhere without being specifically anywhere. They'd spoken maybe 4 times. "Hey," Marcus said. He was trying to look casual and not quite managing it. Ethan put down his sandwich. "Hey, heard about what happened at the diner," Marcus said. "Crazy." "Yeah." Marcus turned his water bottle in his hands. "Some guys were asking about you this morning." Ethan kept his face neutral. "What guys?" "Didn't know them. They were in the parking lot before school. Asked me if I knew you, what kind of car you drove, whether you'd been coming to school regular or missing days." He paused. "I didn't tell them anything. I just said I didn't really know you." "Did you get a look at them?" 2 guys older. One of them had a tattoo on his neck. I couldn't see exactly what, but it was dark like a graphic thing. He set down the bottle. "I probably should have just minded my business." "No," Ethan said. "You did the right thing telling me." He held Marcus's gaze. "Don't talk to them again if they come back. Don't point anyone anywhere. Just come tell me." Marcus nodded, a bit wide-eyed. "Are you okay?" "Working on it," Ethan said, and pulled out his phone and excused himself to the hallway. He called Dale, told her about the men in the parking lot. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "We'll have someone at the school by end of day. Don't leave through the front. Use the side exit by the gymnasium." "They're escalating," Ethan said. "They're probing," Dale said. "There's a difference. If they were escalating, we'd know it faster." She paused. "Ethan, I need you to go through the rest of your school day normally. Can you do that?" "Yes," he said. He went back to the cafeteria, sat back down, picked up his turkey sandwich, and finished it. He talked to Marcus for another few minutes about nothing in particular. He went to 4th period and paid attention to a lecture on the Constitutional Convention that he would later be unable to fully recall. And at 3 o'clock, he left through the gymnasium exit and got into a vehicle that was waiting where Dale had said it would be. And he looked straight ahead as they pulled away, and he didn't look to see if anyone watched them go. That evening, Ava called her father. Ethan wasn't in the room for it, but he heard about it afterward from Ava, who came to find him after dinner, with a look on her face that he'd learned to identify as the particular expression she got when she'd processed something difficult and come out the other side still standing, but altered. "He told me," she said. "Okay," Ethan said. "He thinks it's someone who's been with us for years, not a new person, someone established." She sat down. "Someone who was trusted enough to know Ava's location on any given day, which narrows it to maybe 6 people. He's known for how long? He wouldn't say exactly. Long enough." Her voice had an edge to it, not anger at Victor, something more complicated, the specific frustration of someone who understood why they were being protected and still hated the shape it took. "He didn't tell me because he thought I'd do something about it myself. Would you, She was quiet for a moment. "Probably," she admitted. "Then he wasn't wrong to be cautious," Ethan said. She looked at him sharply. "You're defending him." "I'm being accurate," he said. "He made a call. You might have made a different one. Both of you were trying to protect the situation." "You're 17, she said with something between exasperation and wonder. "Why do you sound like you're 52? "Early start," he said. She almost laughed, stopped herself, then let it out, the short, startled sound, and she looked at him and shook her head. "How do you do that? Do what?" "Make things slightly less terrible without pretending they're fine." He thought about that. "My mother," he said finally. "When she was really sick, at the worst of it, she never pretended it wasn't bad. But she also never stopped finding something in the day that was okay. She'd say, 'It's bad, but look, the coffee's good.' Or, 'It's bad, but the sun came out.' Not pretending, just adding something true that was also better." Ava looked at him for a long moment. "She sounds like a good person." "She's the best person I know," he said. "By a lot." Ava looked down at her hands. "I think about what it would have been like if I'd had a mother growing up," she said. "Someone to learn that from. My dad did his best, but he learned things from a different school entirely." She paused. "He learned strength from loss and loyalty from necessity and justice from his own rules, which are real rules. They just don't look like anything anyone outside his world would recognize." "But you're not him," Ethan said. "No," she said. I'm not. I got my mother something, her instinct. My dad says she had this ability to find the good thing in a room full of bad things, which sometimes got her into trouble because she extended it to people who hadn't earned it. She stopped. He said he loved her most for that and was most afraid of it at the same time. Ethan was quiet. He was thinking about Victor sitting in the chair before dawn, about the way he'd said she was the only thing in his whole life that made complete sense, about the fact that Victor Sinclair had flown across the state on the news of a shooting and sat in a hospital chair in the dark because his daughter was breathing. He's afraid you're like her, Ethan said slowly. Not that you're weak, that you'll trust the wrong person. Ava went still. Yeah, she said, very quietly. That's exactly it. And the fact that you knew what was happening to Derek Holt and ran instead of staying confirms that for him, Ethan said. That you can see the good in a situation that other people only see as tactical. He thinks that'll get me killed, she said. Does he think it almost did? Ethan asked. She looked at him, long enough that the question became its own kind of answer. Maybe, she said, but I'm here. You're here, he agreed. The next twist came from a direction nobody had been watching. Dale brought it in on a Tuesday evening, 12 days after the shooting. She came into the safe house with a specific quality of tension that Ethan had learned to read as distinct from her general state of alertness. This was the tension of someone carrying news that had changed the shape of a plan. She sat across from Victor, who had arrived an hour earlier. Ava was in the other room. Ethan was at the kitchen table with a textbook open that he had not been reading. The sedan that was watching the school, Dale said. We ran the plate. It came back to a shell company that we've seen before. It's connected to a name Raymond Voss. 46 former law enforcement, currently private security. She paused. He's also on a payroll we've been able to partially map. Kane Mercer's payroll. Mercer is running his own surveillance on Ethan, Victor said. It wasn't a question. On Ethan, on the school, on the routes Ethan takes. Dale looked at Ethan directly. Which means Mercer has connected you to Victor. He knows you're not just a civilian casualty. He knows you're inside this. Ethan absorbed this. His back was aching. He had a chemistry test in 2 days. How did he connect me this fast? Ethan said. Victor just decided to involve me directly. That was less than 2 weeks ago. Dale and Victor exchanged a look. There it was. That look, the look of two people who have already had a conversation that's about to become audible to a third person. Before I brought you into this formally, Victor said, I had someone run a full assessment of the diner situation. Everyone in proximity, everyone who'd interacted with Ava. He paused. I shared that assessment with my leadership team, which is 4 people. One of the 4 told Mercer about me, Ethan said. Yes, Victor said. That's how they knew to watch the school, Ethan said. That's how they found Ava at the diner. The same person. Someone in your leadership team who's been feeding Mercer continuously. Yes, Victor said again. You know which one, Ethan said. It wasn't a question either. Victor was quiet for 2 full seconds. I believe I do. Then why? Because belief isn't certainty, Victor said. And in my world, acting on belief without certainty doesn't end with an arrest. It ends with something I'm not willing to put in motion until I'm sure. Ethan understood. He sat with it, the weight of it, a trusted man feeding their positions to Kane Mercer. The reason Ava had been found at the diner. The reason Derek Holt was dead within 48 hours of talking. The reason 6 months of running had never been enough. What do? Ethan said. We feed him something false, Victor said. Something specific enough to be useful to Mercer. Something that if it reaches Mercer, confirms who gave it to him. A test, Ethan said. A test, Victor confirmed. And you're going to be part of it. Because you're the thing Mercer doesn't fully understand yet. He knows you're inside. He doesn't know how far inside. Ethan looked at Victor, looked at Dale, looked back at his chemistry textbook lying open on the table. Tell me what I need to do, he said. And that was when Ava walked in. She had been in the other room she had clearly been listening for longer than any of them had realized, because her face carried the particular expression of someone who has absorbed a series of facts and is in the process of rearranging everything she thought she understood. She looked at her father. Who is it? She said. Her voice was very calm, the dangerous kind of calm that lives right next to the thing you're trying not to feel. Victor held her gaze. Ava. Don't, she said. Don't tell me it's complicated. Don't tell me I can't handle it. Her voice didn't crack, but it wanted to. I have been running for 6 months. I have been careful every minute of every day. I gave up everything to stay small enough to survive, and someone you trusted has been telling them where I am every step of the way. She stopped. Who is it? Victor looked at his daughter for a long moment. The look of a man calculating not whether to tell her, but whether the truth would break something that couldn't be repaired. His name is Garrett, Victor said. He's been with us for 11 years. Ava closed her eyes. He has a daughter, she said quietly. Yes, Victor said. She's my age. Yes. She opened her eyes. There were no tears in them, but something had shifted. Some final irreducible certainty had settled into place, the way sediment settles after water has been disturbed. He sold us for money. We believe so, Victor said. How much, she said. How much is 6 months of my life worth? How much was Derek Holt worth? How much? She stopped herself, pressed her lips together, took one long, controlled breath. Ethan watched her. He didn't say anything. He didn't reach for anything. He just stayed present and let her find her footing. Okay, she said, very quietly. Okay, what's the plan? Victor looked at her, then at Ethan, then back at her. We set a trap, he said. We tell Garrett something specific, a location, a timeline. If Mercer moves on that information, we know it came from Garrett. And then you move on Garrett, Ava said. Yes. And then we move on Mercer, she said. Yes. She nodded, slow, deliberate, like each nod was a door closing on something she needed to close. And what does Ethan do? They all looked at him. He was still sitting at the kitchen table with the chemistry textbook. The false location, Ethan said. Where are you going to tell Garrett I'm going to be? Victor looked at him steadily. We're going to tell him you've been approached by a federal contact, that you're meeting with them at a specific address at a specific time. He paused. We need them to believe the threat to Mercer is becoming official, that you're about to move information through a channel he can't compromise, which will make him accelerate, Ethan said. Whatever he's planning, he'll move faster. Yes. And when he moves on the false location, we'll know it was Garrett, Victor said, and we'll be ready. Ethan thought about this, about the men in the school parking lot, about the gray sedan, about the letter on the doorstep and the methodical destruction of his bicycle, about his mother asking Dale about medication schedules in a house that wasn't their home because their home was no longer safe. Set the meeting, Ethan said. Tell Garrett. Victor reached across the table and picked up his phone and made a call that lasted 45 seconds, low and specific, the kind of call that sounds unremarkable until you understand what it's setting in motion. He put the phone down. He looked at Ethan. It's done, he said, and the trap was open. And somewhere across the city, a man named Garrett, who had known Ava Sinclair since she was 11 years old, picked up his own phone and made a call he thought no one was watching him make. He was wrong. Garrett called Mercer at 9:47 that evening. They knew because Dale had been running a tap on Garrett's secondary phone for 6 days, not his primary number, the one registered in his name and connected to his life, but the second one, the prepaid, he kept in the inner pocket of his jacket and never used in the same room as anyone from Victor's organization. It had taken 4 days to identify the number and 2 more to get the intercept in place. By the time Garrett made the call, they were ready. Ethan didn't hear the actual call. What he heard was Dale's summary delivered to Victor in the kitchen of the safe house at 10:15, while Ava sat at the table and Ethan stood near the doorway with his arms folded and his shoulder throbbing in the specific way it did when he'd been awake too many hours. He confirmed the meeting location, Dale said. The address Victor gave him the timeline. He told Mercer the boy is going federal. Those were his exact words. The boy is going federal, and it happens Thursday. Victor was quiet for a moment. What did Mercer say? He said, handle it. The room went still. Ava looked at the table. Her hands were flat on the surface, the same way they'd been in the diner the night everything started. Handle it, she said, meaning Ethan. Meaning the meeting, Dale said carefully. Meaning anyone at that address Thursday night. Which is no one, Ethan said from the doorway, because the address is empty. Correct, Dale said, but Mercer doesn't know that. Victor turned to face Ethan fully. This is the confirmation we needed. Garrett is the source. There is no question now. He paused, which means we move in two stages. Garrett tonight before he realizes the trap has closed. And then we use what we take from Garrett to accelerate the timeline on Mercer. What does taking from Garrett mean? Ethan said. Victor held his gaze. It means a conversation Garrett is not going to enjoy. Ethan let that sit for a moment. He was not naive about what lived inside that sentence. He'd spent enough time in Victor's orbit now to understand that the word conversation could mean a great many different things depending on the room it happened in. I don't need to be there for that, Ethan said. It wasn't a question. No, Victor said. You don't. But I need to know what comes out of it, Ethan said. Everything that comes out of it. Victor studied him for a moment. You have my word. It said something about where Ethan had arrived 12 days into this, that Victor Sinclair's word felt like something he could actually weigh. He nodded once. Dale left the room to make calls. Victor followed, and Ethan and Ava were alone in the kitchen with the particular silence of two people who have just watched the ground shift under something they thought was stable. Garrett, Ava said, still looking at the table. Yeah, I've known him since I was 11, she said. He came to my birthday. He brought me a book I remember because it was the kind of book adults think children want, very earnest and very boring. And I read the whole thing anyway because he looked so pleased about choosing it. She stopped. His daughter's name is Brianna. She goes to a dance school. Garrett used to show my dad pictures on his phone. Ethan didn't say anything. I know the logic, Ava said. I know why people do things like this. Money is real. Fear is real. Whatever Mercer offered him or threatened him with was real in a way that loyalty sometimes can't compete with. She finally looked up. Knowing the logic doesn't help as much as you'd think. No, he agreed. It doesn't. Does it get easier, she asked. Finding out who people actually are versus who you thought they were. He thought about his father who had left when Ethan was 8 with a specific kind of ease that made clear the leaving had been decided long before it happened. He thought about reading that at 8 years old from the way the man packed, not rushed, not guilty, just relieved. You stop being surprised, he said. That's different from it getting easier. She looked at him. How do you not become cynical? I don't know, he said honestly. I think it's because I've also seen the other kind, the real kind. My mother never stopped choosing the harder thing when the easier thing was available. He paused. I think if you've seen what real loyalty looks like, even once you can't pretend the fake version is all there is. Ava was quiet, looking at him with that expression he had started to recognize, the one where she was cataloging something, filing it. You should sleep, she said finally. You should too. I'm not going to. Me neither, he admitted. She looked down at the table again. Then she said very quietly, thank you for staying in this. You don't have to keep thanking me. I know, she said. I'm doing it anyway. Garrett was brought in at 2 a.m. Ethan didn't see it happen. He was in his room, a spare room in the safe house, functional and impersonal, lying on the bed with his eyes open, listening to the particular quality of nighttime quiet that exists in a house with people in it who are all awake but being still. At 2:12, he heard a vehicle arrive, movement through the house, voices low, then a door. Then nothing for a long time. Victor came to him at 4:30. He looked the same as he always looked, which was itself a kind of information. Whatever had happened in the hours between 2 and 4:30 had not shaken him. He sat in the chair in the corner of the room and looked at Ethan and said, Garrett confirmed everything. Mercer's been running him for 3 years. He recruited him when Garrett's daughter got sick medical bills, the specific kind of pressure that turns reasonable people toward unreasonable choices. Mercer offered to cover the bills in exchange for information. Garrett told himself it was small things at first, scheduling routines, things that felt harmless. Until they weren't, Ethan said. Until Derek Holt, Victor said. Garrett knew Holt was talking to our man. He passed it to Mercer. He told himself Mercer would just scare Holt off. He paused. He was wrong about that. Ethan sat up on the edge of the bed. He's been living with that. Yes. Is that why he cooperated tonight? Because he's been looking for a way out of it. Victor considered this, partly, and partly because I gave him a very clear picture of his alternatives. He paused. He's going to give us Mercer, full operational detail, the warehouse, the personnel, the timeline for the trafficking run he's been planning. It's scheduled for Saturday. Ethan looked at him. That's 4 days. Yes. And you're moving on it. We're moving on it, Victor said. Vita. All of it. The warehouse, the crossing point, the corrupt officials. We've been building toward this for 2 years. Garrett just handed us the last piece. What about the FBI channel, Ethan said. The clean contact you've been trying to find? Victor reached into his jacket and set a card on the bed beside Ethan. Plain white federal, an agent's name and a field office number. Garrett also gave us a name, Victor said. An agent he knows Mercer has never been able to compromise. Clean record, no connection to the Arizona operation. He's been trying to build a case on Mercer from the outside for 18 months, without the inside information to crack it. Ethan picked up the card. Read the name. You've already called him. Dale has made contact, Victor said. Preliminary only. We're meeting Thursday, before Saturday. Ethan set the card down. He was quiet for a moment, putting pieces together that Victor hadn't arranged for him, just sitting with the shape of what was coming. You said we're moving on it, he said. All of it. Yes. What's my role? Victor looked at him steadily. I need you to be at the Thursday meeting with the FBI agent. Ethan blinked. Why? Because you're the only person in this chain of custody who is completely clean, Victor said. No criminal record, no affiliation, no compromising associations. You are a 17-year-old who was shot at a diner while protecting a civilian who subsequently made contact with my organization for protection. Your testimony about what you witnessed the shooting, the surveillance at your school, the letter gives the FBI a basis to act that doesn't require them to take my word for anything. Ethan let that land. You need me to be the credible witness. I need you to be exactly what you are, Victor said, which is the most credible person in this entire situation. It was the same logic as the beginning. Ethan thought, the same logic that had made him useful, his ordinariness, his cleanness, the fact that he existed outside the world that both Victor and Mercer inhabited. He'd been leveraged as invisible, and now he was being leveraged as visible. And the common thread was that he was the one thing neither side could manufacture. Okay, he said. There's something else, Victor said. Ethan waited. I want you at the warehouse Saturday, Victor said. Not in an operational role, not armed, not involved in the takedown, but present. Why quieto? Because what happens in that warehouse is going to define the next chapter of this, Victor said carefully. And I want someone there who will hold me to the version of this I'm telling you about. The version where we bring the FBI, where we hand over what we have, where we do this in a way that doesn't start a war that burns everything in its path. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. You're asking me to be your conscience. I'm asking you to be a witness, Victor said. Those are different things. Are they? Victor held his gaze. Maybe not entirely, he admitted. Thursday came the way difficult things always come too fast, and not fast enough simultaneously the hours before it's stretching and then suddenly compressing into the moment itself. The FBI agent's name was Carver. Michael Carver, 43, 18 years with the Bureau, currently assigned to a task force that officially focused on cross-border narcotics, but had been quietly accumulating evidence on Mercer's trafficking operation for the better part of 2 years. He was a compact man with a direct manner and the specific quality of stillness that Ethan had also noticed in Victor, the practiced calm of someone who had trained themselves out of visible reaction. He looked at Ethan across the table and said, You're the diner kid. Yes, Ethan said. You're 17. Yes. And you're telling me you've been inside Victor Sinclair's operation for nearly 2 weeks. I've been receiving protection from Victor Sinclair's organization for nearly 2 weeks, Ethan said carefully, which is different from being inside his operation. Carver looked at him. Something shifted in his expression, not quite amusement, but an acknowledgement that the distinction was real. What do you know about Kane Mercer? Ethan told him. He was methodical and specific. He told him about the Reapers, about the crossing operations, about the names Garrett had provided about the warehouse and the Saturday timeline. He told him about the gray sedan at his school, the letter on his doorstep, the men asking about him in the parking lot. He laid it out the way he'd learned to lay things out in order, with no embellishment, leaving nothing out that mattered. When he finished, Carver was quiet for a long moment. The information Garrett provided matches what we've been building independently, Carver said finally. The warehouse location, the personnel list. We've had eyes on that property for 3 weeks, but we haven't had grounds for a warrant. You do now, Victor said from the other side of the table. Assuming Garrett is willing to make a formal statement, Carver said. He is, Victor said. Carver looked at Victor with the look of a federal agent looking at the vice president of a motorcycle club who was offering to hand him the biggest trafficking case in his region on a structured platter. It was a complicated look. It contained gratitude and suspicion and professional discomfort and pragmatism in roughly equal measure. What do you want from this? Carver asked him directly. Kane Mercer in federal custody, Victor said. The trafficking operation shut down. The corrupt officials named and prosecuted. The victims in those containers identified and treated as human beings rather than evidence. He paused. An acknowledgement that this office ran a clean operation without my people becoming targets for their cooperation. I can't make promises about what the Bureau does or doesn't do, Carver said. I'm not asking for promises, Victor said. I'm asking for an understanding. Carver looked at him, looked at Ethan, looked at Dale, who was sitting at the end of the table in characteristic silence. Saturday, he said. What's the timeline? The run starts at 11 p.m., Victor said. They'll be loading the containers by 9. The warehouse will be fully staffed by 8:30. I need 6 hours to get assets in position without triggering Mercer's police contacts, Carver said, which means I need to be moving by 2 p.m. Saturday. We can work with that, Victor said, and Sinclair. Carver leaned forward slightly. I need your word that your people are not going into that warehouse before my agents are in position. Victor looked at him steadily. You have it. Carver sat back. He picked up the pen in front of him, turned it over, once set it down. All right, he said, let's talk logistics. Ethan sat through 3 more hours of planning that he mostly listened to and occasionally clarified when someone needed verification of something he'd witnessed directly. By the end, there was a structure in place, not perfect, not without risk, but the kind of structure that has enough integrity in each component that the whole thing holds even when individual pieces shift. Walking out, Carver fell into step beside Ethan for a moment and said quietly, You handled yourself in there. Thank you, Ethan said. You're still 17, Carver said, which means what happened Saturday, I need you to promise me you're not in the operational zone. Victor has the same requirement, Ethan said. Good. Carver glanced at him. You've got a decent head for this. You should think about what you want to do with that. He walked ahead, and that was all he said. Ethan thought about it for approximately 45 seconds, then thought about his chemistry test, which he had somehow managed to take on Wednesday and believed he'd passed. He thought about Mrs. Delgado telling him to come see her if things changed. He thought about the word this, which Carver had used as though it was a clear category, a defined profession, a path that had edges you could see. He wasn't sure it was any of those things. He was 17 and he'd been shot twice, and he was about to watch a federal operation close around a trafficking ring, and none of that felt like a career path. It felt like a thing that was happening because he had jumped when he should have thought, and the jump had led to other jumps, and here he was. Saturday began the way it would end, cold and clear, the kind of Arizona night that makes the stars look close enough to be a threat. Victor came for Ethan at 7 p.m. He was wearing his vest, the full patch, the colors that Ethan had gradually learned to read, not as an identity statement, but as a declaration of something more like intent, the way a uniform says, I am accountable to this, without spelling out every term of the accountability. He looked at Ethan when he came to the door and said, You don't have to come. I know, Ethan said. It's going to be difficult to watch. I know that too. Victor studied him for a moment, then, Are you afraid? Ethan thought about it honestly. Yes, he said, but not about the same things I would have been afraid of 2 weeks ago. Victor nodded, a single deliberate nod. Let's go. Ava was waiting in the hallway. She looked at her father, then at Ethan, and she said, I want to come. No, Victor said immediately. Dad. No, he said again. The word had a specific finality to it. Not cold, not a dismissal, but the finality of someone who has made a decision from love and cannot be moved from it. You are the reason this matters. That means you are the last person who should be in that building. She looked at him. Her jaw was tight. I've been running for 6 months. I want to be there when it ends. It's not going to end in that warehouse, Victor said. It ends in courtrooms over years in testimony and evidence and legal process. Tonight is one night. Your life is after tonight. He held her gaze. I need you here. Safe. That's not me keeping you small. That's me making sure there is an after. Ava looked at her father for a long moment. Then she looked at Ethan. He didn't say anything. He held her gaze and let her make her own read. She exhaled. Fine, she said. She looked at her father. But you bring him back. I intend to, Victor said. She looked at Ethan. And you? She pointed at him with the specific emphasis of someone who doesn't have a complete sentence but needs to communicate a complete thought. You come back. That's the plan, he said. She looked at him for one more second. Then she turned and walked back into the house, and that was the last thing she said to either of them before they left. The warehouse was on the outskirts of the industrial district, a large low building that had once processed machine parts and now processed something that couldn't be named on a shipping manifest. Carver's teams were in position by 8. Victor had 12 men around the perimeter. The coordination between the two had been negotiated down to a specific sequence. FBI moved first Victor's people as backup, no independent action, until Carver's team had cleared the entry points. Ethan rode in the second vehicle with Dale and 2 of Victor's men, who moved with the specific economy of people who had done this kind of thing before and had long since metabolized the adrenaline into something operational. They parked 2 blocks out. Ethan was told clearly, firmly, with the weight of both Victor and Carver behind it, that he stayed with the vehicle until he was told otherwise. He stayed with the vehicle. He sat in the back seat and he listened to the radio traffic that Dale was monitoring through an earpiece she'd given him, and he tracked the sequence: Carver's team at the main entrance, 2 secondary teams at the loading docks, Victor's people sealing the perimeter exits. The whole structure moved like something that had been built carefully and was now being tested for the first time. At 9:47, the first radio call came: entry, breached, resistance encountered at the east loading dock, 2 of Mercer's men down, non-fatal agents advancing to the interior. At 9:53, primary target located. Kane Mercer in the main floor of the warehouse. At 10:01, Mercer in custody. And then Victor's voice on the radio, low and even. Ethan, come in. Dale looked at him. He looked at her. She nodded. He got out of the vehicle. The inside of the warehouse was a specific kind of terrible. Not because of the violence which had been contained. Carver's teams were professional. The resistance had been fast and decisive, and by the time Ethan entered, the operational part was essentially complete. It was terrible for a different reason. The containers were already there. 12 of them stacked and sealed, and Carver's people were moving through them, systematically opening them. And from inside came sounds that Ethan was not prepared for and would not forget. People. Alive, all of them, which was not a given, which was why the relief in the agents' voices as they called clear had a specific texture to it. Families, children, people who had paid everything they had and been loaded into containers in the dark. Ethan stopped walking when the first container opened. He stood there for a moment, just stood there and let himself feel the full weight of what he was looking at, not the tactical situation, not the operational outcome, but the actual human reality of it. People blinking in the light, a woman holding a child against her chest with both arms, a man in his 60s who looked like someone's grandfather being helped down by a federal agent who was saying something in Spanish, low and steady. He stood there until he could breathe normally again. Then he kept walking. Victor was in the center of the warehouse floor. Kane Mercer was on his knees, hands behind his back, Carver's cuffs on his wrists. He was a large man, not physically imposing in the way Victor was, but the particular largeness of someone whose authority had always been translated through other people's fear. Without that translation, he looked smaller than Ethan had expected. He looked like a man who understood that something had ended and had not yet decided what to do with that understanding. Victor was standing in front of him, not close, a few feet away, just looking at him with the specific quality of attention that Ethan had learned to identify as Victor's version of something very controlled, sitting on top of something very deep. He looked up when Ethan approached. His eyes moved over Ethan, once checking the way you check something you were responsible for bringing into a dangerous place. "You're okay," Victor said. It wasn't a question. "I'm okay," Ethan said. Victor looked back at Mercer. "Kane Mercer," he said, not introducing him, naming him the way you name something you've been tracking for a long time and are finally looking at directly. Mercer looked up at him. "Whatever you think you've accomplished tonight." "Don't," Victor said quietly. "Don't do that." Mercer closed his mouth. Victor reached into his vest and took out his weapon and held it at his side, not raised, not pointed, just held. The way you hold something when you want the room to understand that a decision is present but hasn't been made yet. He looked at Ethan, and then he did the thing Ethan had not expected. He held the weapon out to him. Not to use the gesture was too deliberate for that, too considered. It was an offering, a placement of something in Ethan's hands that said, here is a choice. Here is the version of this where I step back and you decide. After everything, Victor said quietly, you deserve to be the one who chooses what this becomes. The warehouse was very still. Carver's agents were watching. Victor's men were watching. Mercer was watching from his knees. Ethan looked at the weapon in his hand. He looked at the open containers. The families being let out blinking alive. The woman with her child. The grandfather being helped down. He looked at Kane Mercer on his knees, and he felt something that surprised him, not rage, which he'd expected, and not satisfaction, which he'd feared. He felt tired. Tired in the specific cellular way of someone who has been carrying something heavy for long enough that they've forgotten the version of themselves that didn't carry it. He thought about Ava pressing her hands against his shoulder in a ruined diner and saying, this is my fault, and meaning it with her whole body. He thought about his mother eating soup from a can. He thought about Derek Holt, who had tried to get out and hadn't made it. He thought about Garrett, who had started with something small and built a life on trying not to look at what it was growing into. He thought about what Victor had said in the hospital in the dark before the sun came up. In a world built on violence, she chose to leave it. And he understood suddenly and completely what Victor had meant when he said he wanted someone there to hold him to the version of this he was telling. He lowered the weapon. He held it back out to Victor. No more blood, he said. His voice came out even, solid, like something that had always been true and had just found its sentence. Call Carver, get Mercer into federal custody, end it the right way. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of the specific weight of a decision that had just been made in front of witnesses that had chosen one version of the world over another and would not be retracted. Mercer stared at him from the floor. Whatever he'd expected from the boy who'd been shot at a roadside diner and somehow ended up here, it wasn't this. Victor took the weapon back. He looked at Ethan with an expression that Ethan couldn't fully read. Pride was in it, and relief, and something that looked like recognition. The recognition of a man seeing something in another person that he thought existed only in memory. Carver, Victor called without looking away from Ethan. Already moving, Carver said from across the warehouse. We've got him. Mercer was brought to his feet by 2 federal agents. He didn't look at Ethan again. He looked at Victor, one long assessing look of a man recalibrating his entire understanding of what had just happened, and then he was turned and walked toward the exit and the night outside, and with him went something that had been building pressure for 2 years. Victor looked at Ethan for a long moment. You understand what you just did, he said. I lowered a gun, Ethan said. You chose law over blood, Victor said. In a room full of men who have spent their lives learning that blood is faster. He paused. That's not nothing. That's not a small thing. It's what was right, Ethan said. Yes, Victor said. It is. He looked across the warehouse at the families being processed by federal agents, at the containers standing open, at the controlled movement of an operation that was finishing the way he'd told Ethan it would, not perfectly, not cleanly, but with enough integrity to hold. It is exactly what was right. From the far end of the warehouse, Carver's voice carried, Sinclair, we're going to need statements. Tonight, if possible. Tonight, Victor confirmed and turned toward the exit. Ethan stood in the center of the warehouse floor for one more moment. He stood in the cold air and the light and the sounds of people being brought out of the dark, and he breathed, and he let the full shape of the last 2 weeks settle into something he could actually hold. He was 17 years old. He had been shot at a roadside diner and survived. He had sat across from the vice president of the Hells Angels at a kitchen table and listened to a war being mapped. He had gone back to school and noticed a gray sedan and reported a license plate and eaten a turkey sandwich. He had sat in a federal meeting and testified and been told he had a decent head for things by a man who made his living knowing the difference. And he had stood in a warehouse and held a weapon and looked at a man on his knees and chosen something other than the ending the room was built for. He didn't know yet what any of it meant. He didn't know what came next or what shape his life would take when this particular emergency finished reshaping it. He didn't know who he was becoming or whether the boy who had worked the late shift at Harlan's road stop and been invisible was still in him somewhere, or whether that version of himself was the one thing the last 2 weeks had permanently changed. But he knew one thing with a certainty that sat in his bones rather than his mind. He had not been wrong to jump. Whatever came after, whatever had already come after the jump had been right. He walked toward the exit, toward the cold night air, and the vehicles, and the federal agents and Victor's men, and the long work of testimony and documentation, and the beginning of the aftermath. And behind him, the last container was opened, and the last family stepped into the light. The statements took 4 hours. Carver ran it like a man who understood that the window between an operation and its legal consolidation was the most fragile interval in the entire process. The moment when everything that had just happened was still raw and unprocessed. When testimony was cleanest, but also when people were most likely to say something that would complicate a case that needed to be airtight. He moved through it methodically, one witness at a time, separating them in different rooms, recording everything, building a documentary record that no defense attorney could later claim was contaminated by consultation. Ethan gave his statement in a room with 2 federal agents and a recorder, and Carver sitting across from him. He went through it the same way he'd gone through everything in the last 2 weeks in order factually without embellishment. The shooting at the diner, the letter on the doorstep, the bicycle, the gray sedan at his school, the men asking about him in the parking lot, Marcus telling him over lunch, the Thursday meeting with Carver, which Carver's people had already documented, but which Ethan's testimony now placed on the record from his perspective. When he finished, Carver clicked off the recorder and said, "That's going to hold, every piece of it." "What happens now?" Ethan said. "Mercer goes into federal holding tonight. Arraignment Monday. The U.S. Attorney's Office has been briefed. They've been waiting for an arrest that could actually stick. And between Garrett's cooperation, the physical evidence at the warehouse, and your testimony, this sticks." Carver paused. "The corrupt officials are going to be a longer process. You build up from the bottom, Mercer first, then you use what Mercer gives you to pressure the people above him in the official channels. Mercer's going to flip. Men like that always do when the walls close correctly. The victims," Ethan said, "the families from the containers, already in federal care. We've got interpreters on site, medical personnel, refugee advocacy organizations notified. It's going to be a long process for each of them individually, but they're safe. They're getting treated." Carver looked at him directly. "You did that. Understand that. What you did 2 weeks ago in that diner led to the night that led to this. Those people being in federal care instead of wherever Mercer was delivering them, that has a beginning, and the beginning is you." Ethan didn't know what to do with that. He sat with it the way you sit with something too large to absorb quickly. "Thank you," he said finally. Carver nodded. "Go home, Ethan, or wherever home is right now." Home was still the safe house, but Carver's words followed him out of that room and into the vehicle and through the 40-minute drive back, sitting alongside everything else he was carrying. Ava was awake when they got back. She was sitting at the kitchen table, the same chair, the same posture, hands around a coffee mug, and when Ethan walked in, she looked at him with the specific intensity of someone who has been watching a door for hours and is now reading every square inch of the person walking through it. "You're okay," she said. Not a question, a confirmation of what she was seeing. "I'm okay," he said. "And Mercer, federal custody, arraignment Monday." She exhaled. It was a long, slow release, the kind of breath that carries something with it, something that had been compressed for a very long time. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. The families at the warehouse. Safe, all of them. She pressed her lips together, looked down at the table. When she looked up again, her eyes were red-edged but dry. "It's over," she said. "The first part of it," Ethan said honestly. "The legal part is going to take time." "I know." She paused. "But the running part is over." "Yes," he said, "that part is over." She looked at him for a long moment. "What happened in there? My father won't tell me everything." Ethan sat down across from her. He told her. All of it, the containers, the families coming out into the light, Mercer on his knees, Victor holding out the weapon. The choice. When he finished, she was very still. "He gave you the gun," she said slowly. "Yes." "And you lowered it." "Yes." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. It had too many things in it, relief and something that might have been the beginning of tears she was deciding not to release. And underneath both of those, something quieter and more fundamental, like recognition. I knew you would, she said. You weren't there. I didn't need to be there. She held his gaze. I knew the second he told me he was bringing you that I knew what you'd do, because you're... She stopped. Tried again. You don't operate from the same place most people operate from. You don't make decisions from fear or pride or anger. You make them from what's actually true. Ethan looked at the table. I was afraid, he said. I know. That's what I mean. She leaned forward slightly. You were afraid and you lowered it anyway because the fear didn't change what was right. That's not common, Ethan. That's genuinely not common. He didn't know what to say. He was exhausted and his shoulder was reminding him with considerable emphasis that it had been through a great deal, and somewhere behind all of that was something simpler and harder to name that Ava's words were getting close to touching. I'm glad it's over, he said. It felt inadequate. It also felt true. Me too, she said. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Just for a moment, not dramatic, not weighted with anything beyond the gesture itself. Then she took it back. Get some sleep, she said. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I'm gonna do that. Victor arrived at the safe house the next morning with news that rewrote the shape of what was already done. Ethan heard him come in and pulled himself upright, still half asleep, his body registering the hour and the ache in his shoulder and back as an integrated complaint. He came to the kitchen doorway in time to see Victor sitting across from Dale at the table, and he knew from the particular quality of tension in the room that something had shifted. Garrett, Dale said when she saw Ethan. He recanted. Ethan went still. He what? Late last night, Victor said. He looked tired in a way Ethan hadn't seen before. Not the tiredness of a long operation, but the tiredness of something unexpected arriving from a direction he'd secured. His attorney made contact with the federal prosecutor's office at 2 a.m. Garrett is withdrawing his cooperation agreement. He's claiming his statement was given under duress. He was going to testify, Ethan said. He was the direct connection between Mercer and the corrupt officials. Without his testimony, the case against Mercer holds, Victor said. The physical evidence from the warehouse, the financial records we pulled from his operation, your testimony, Carver's agents, that holds. Mercer is not walking out of federal custody. He paused. But the officials, the prosecutor's office, the sheriff's department connections. Without Garrett linking them directly to payments and operational decisions, the corruption charges become harder to bring. Mercer can still give them up, Ethan said. Carver said Mercer would flip. Mercer now knows Garrett recanted, Victor said. He knows his own cooperation has more leverage than it did 12 hours ago. His attorney filed for a bail hearing this morning. Ethan sat down. He put his hands on the table and looked at them and thought. Garrett recanted because someone got to him, he said. Between when he cooperated with us and 2 a.m, someone made contact. His daughter, Dale said. We believe Mercer's people made contact with Garrett's daughter. Not a threat, something more targeted than that. An offer. Protection for the family, financial security disappears somewhere safe, in exchange for Garrett walking back his statement. Ethan thought about Garrett showing Victor pictures of his daughter on his phone. A dance school? Brianna. The thing that had turned him in the first place was also the thing being used to turn him back. He's not evil, Ethan said. He's terrified. He's making the wrong choice for understandable reasons, Victor said, which is still a wrong choice with real consequences. Can we reach him? Ethan said. Not through official channels directly, someone who can actually talk to him. Victor looked at him. What do you mean? He's not a committed Mercer loyalist, Ethan said. He got into this because he needed money for his daughter's medical bills. He stayed in because the alternative felt worse. But he cooperated with us when you gave him a clear picture of his alternatives, which means he can be moved. He's not anchored to Mercer. He's anchored to fear. He paused. Who does he trust beyond your organization, beyond law enforcement? Who does he actually trust? Victor and Dale exchanged a look. His brother, Dale said, in Tucson. They're close. Can you reach the brother? Ethan said. We can locate him, Victor said. Not locate him, Ethan said. Talk to him. Explain what's actually happening. Not the Reaper version, not the version Mercer's people fed to Garrett, the actual version. What the warehouse had in it, what Mercer was running, what Garrett's testimony protects versus what his recanting enables. He looked at Victor. Garrett is making a decision based on incomplete information filtered through fear. People do that. It doesn't mean they can't make a different decision if the information changes. Victor was quiet for a long moment. You want me to send someone to talk to a civilian in Tucson? I want you to make sure Garrett's brother has an accurate picture, Ethan said. What he does with it is his decision. And if Garrett still recants, then at least the decision is his, Ethan said, not Mercer's. Victor looked at him with the particular expression Ethan had started to recognize as his version of genuine surprise, carefully controlled, mostly visible in the eyes. He turned to Dale. Find the brother, he said. The brother's name was Philip Garrett. He was 51, a retired teacher living in a house outside Tucson that he'd shared with his wife for 22 years. He had no criminal record, no connection to any of the organizations currently in collision, no reason to be sitting across from one of Victor Sinclair's men at 11 in the morning on a Sunday. Dale made the contact herself. She told Ethan about it afterward in the clinical, factual way she reported most things, but he could read between the lines. Philip Garrett had listened to the full picture, the warehouse, the containers, the families, the crossing operations that had been running for 2 years under cover of corrupted officials. And when Dale finished, he had sat in silence for a long time. Then he had said, "Does my brother understand what was in those containers?" "We believe he was told they were product shipments," Dale said, "not people." Philip had been quiet again. Then he'd said, "Let me talk to him." That conversation happened by phone, and Ethan wasn't privy to it, and neither was Victor, because Philip Garrett had made clear that the condition of his involvement was that it was private. Whatever two brothers said to each other, when one of them had been living inside something terrible, and the other was just finding out, that was not something that needed witnesses. At 2 in the afternoon, Garrett's attorney called the U.S. Attorney's Office and withdrew the recantation. The cooperation agreement was reinstated. The bail hearing Mercer's attorney had filed for was denied. Ethan was sitting with Ava in the kitchen when Dale came in and told them. Ava set her coffee mug down very carefully on the table and said, "Philip talked to him." "Yes," Dale said. "Good," Ava said, very quietly. "Good." Ethan looked at her. "You knew about the brother." "I've known Garrett since I was 11, she said. "He used to talk about Philip all the time. His brother who became a teacher when the whole family expected him to go into business. He was proud of him in this quiet way, like it proved something about where they'd come from." She paused. "I thought about Philip on Saturday night when my father told me Garrett had recanted. I thought Philip doesn't know. Philip has no idea who his brother became. And if Philip knew, Garrett would know he knew, and that would matter to him more than almost anything." Ethan looked at her. "You didn't say anything." "You figured it out yourself," she said, "faster than I would have. You could have helped. You didn't need my help." A pause. "And I needed to see if you'd get there. I needed to know if my read on you was right." He absorbed that. "And," she picked up her coffee mug again. "You got there," she said. "Man." The corruption charges broke open on Thursday. With Garrett's testimony reinstated and Mercer facing the full weight of the physical evidence, Mercer's attorney opened preliminary cooperation discussions with the U.S. Attorney's Office on Monday. By Tuesday, Mercer was providing names. Not all of them, not immediately, not without negotiation, but enough. The first name he gave was a CBP supervisor named Hargrave, who had been facilitating the crossing operations for 18 months. Hargrave was arrested Wednesday morning. By Thursday, Hargrave was giving names too, and the cascade was in motion. Deputy Sheriff Kellerman, Federal Prosecutor Nolan Walsh, a CBP agent in Nogales, a city council member in Phoenix who had been running logistics money through a real estate firm. Each arrest was a shock to a different part of a system that had believed itself protected. Each arrest was also a door opening onto the next one, because the people Mercer had corrupted had protected themselves by knowing each other's secrets, and knowing each other's secrets meant that when one of them broke, they all had things to trade. Carver called Ethan on Thursday evening. "Thought you should know," he said. "Walsh, the prosecutor, he's giving us the financial structure. The full payment chain between Mercer's operation and the officials. It goes further than we thought, and it's documented well enough that the defense bar is going to have a very difficult time with it." "How far does it go?" Ethan said. Far enough that 3 federal judges are going to have some very uncomfortable weeks, Carver said. I can't say more than that. A pause. But I wanted you to know it's moving. It's actually moving. Thank you for calling, Ethan said. Thank you for the Tuesday thing, Carver said. The brother. That wasn't me, Ethan said. That was Philip Garrett deciding to tell his brother the truth. Someone put that in motion, Carver said. Ethan didn't answer that. Carver said goodbye and hung up, and Ethan sat with the phone in his hand and thought about cascades, about the way one true thing placed correctly could move through a system that had been built on lies and find every crack simultaneously. He thought about jumping across a diner counter. He thought about how one moment of not thinking had started a chain that had led to a warehouse, that had led to a phone call from a retired school teacher in Tucson, that had led to a federal prosecutor giving up a financial structure that reached 3 federal judges. He sat with that for a while. It was too large to hold all at once. He held what he could. His mother came home 12 days after the warehouse. The safe house had been their reality long enough that walking back into their own house felt slightly disorienting, the particular adjustment of returning to something familiar that has been absent long enough to feel subtly new. Claire walked through each room with her hand trailing along the walls the way she did when she was taking inventory of something she'd been worried about. And Ethan followed her without saying anything because he understood that this was her way of confirming that it was still theirs. She stopped in the kitchen and turned to him. Tell me everything now, she said. He told her. All of it, this time not the managed version he'd been giving her, the one pruned of the parts most likely to frighten her, but the actual version. The warehouse. The weapon Victor had offered. The choice he'd made. Carver's calls. The cascading arrests. She listened without interrupting. That was something he had always loved about his mother. She listened completely without filling the silence with her own reactions, without flinching away from the difficult parts. She let him finish. Then she said, When you lowered the gun. Yeah, he said. Were you afraid? Yes. Of what? He thought about it honestly. Of being wrong, he said. Of choosing the thing that looked right and being wrong about what right meant in that specific room. But you weren't wrong, she said. No, but I didn't know that when I lowered it. She looked at him for a long moment. That's the hardest kind of right, she said, when you don't know yet. When you just have to be it and find out. He looked at her. How do you know when you're that kind of right? You don't, she said. You just move toward the thing that looks most like what you'd want to have done when you look back. She paused. The coffee being good, Ethan. Even in the worst room. You look for the thing that's true and better. He didn't say anything. He sat with it. His mother reached across and put her hand on his face for a moment, just briefly, the way she'd done since he was small, her palm against his cheek. Then she dropped it. You hungry? She said. Starving, he said. Good, she said. I'm making actual food tonight, not soup from a can. He said. 2 weeks after the warehouse, Ethan went back to the diner. Not to work. Harlan had closed the diner indefinitely, which was a decision that had probably been building for a while and had simply found its occasion. The building itself was still standing, the crime scene tape was gone, but the sign had been turned off and the parking lot was empty. He stood in the parking lot and looked at it. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Closure was a word that had always felt slightly invented to him, a therapeutic frame placed over the fact that things didn't end cleanly, they just moved into different configurations. The diner wasn't closed because the shooting had ended it. The diner was closed because Harlan's drinking had been ending it for 3 years, and the shooting had simply accelerated a conclusion that was already in motion. But he'd spent 4 years of his life inside that building. He'd learned things there that school hadn't taught him, and that survival alone couldn't have taught him the specific education of watching people at their most unguarded when they were tired and hungry and far from home and not performing for anyone. He'd learned patience there. He'd learned to read the difference between what people said and what they needed. He'd learned that ordinary could be a kind of protection and also a kind of trap, depending on which side of it you were standing on. He'd learned that you couldn't always know before you moved whether you were going to land right. He was standing in the parking lot thinking about this when Ava's car pulled in. She got out and walked over and stood beside him, both of them looking at the dark diner. How did you know I was here? He said. I didn't, she said. I just wanted to see it, where it started. He looked at her. She was different from the girl who had sat in the corner booth watching exits. Not in an obvious way, the same dark hair, the same gray hoodie she'd apparently decided was foundational to her wardrobe, but in the quality of her attention. She wasn't scanning exits. She was just looking. "It's smaller than I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Something larger. Something that looked like a place where a life changes." "They never look like what they are," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about what comes next," she said. "For me, I haven't had a next in 6 months. Just the next hour, the next safe house, the next time a car didn't turn out to be what I was afraid it was." "What do you want it to be?" he said. "I want to finish school," she said. "A real school. I want to be in a classroom with regular people who are worried about regular things." She paused. "I want to not know where every exit is the second I walk into a room." "That's going to take a while," he said. "I know." A pause. "What about you?" He looked at the diner. "I don't know exactly," he said honestly. "Mrs. Delgado wants me to think about college. I've been thinking about it." He paused. "I've also been thinking about what Carver said, about having a head for things." "What kind of things?" "The kind where you have to figure out what's actually true in a situation where everyone has an interest in you believing a different version of it," he said. "Law, maybe, or something adjacent to it." He paused. "I don't know yet. I'm 17. "You keep saying that like it's supposed to mean you don't know things," she said. "You know more than most people twice your age." "Knowing things and knowing what to do with them are different," he said. She looked at him. "You knew what to do with them in a warehouse with a gun in your hand." "That one time." "That one time is a pretty significant data point," she said. He almost laughed, the same surprise as always, finding something lighter than expected in a heavy conversation. They stood in the parking lot for another few minutes, not saying much. The night was clear and cold, the stars doing their Arizona thing of appearing too close and too numerous. A truck moved past on Route 89 without slowing its lights, sweeping across the diner's dark windows. "My father wants to have dinner," Ava said. "Next week. You, me, your mother, him. Somewhere that isn't a safe house or a federal meeting room." "Dinner," Ethan said. He said, and I'm quoting directly because it was very unlike him, he said he'd like to spend time with the people he's grateful to in a context that doesn't involve active danger. Ethan looked at her. He said that. He said that. Victor Sinclair said the words active danger. "I know, I almost wrote it down." She looked at him. "Will you come?" "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, of course." She nodded, started to turn back toward her car, then stopped. "Ethan." "Yeah." "I stopped watching exits," she said. "When I came in here, I didn't even notice until just now." She looked at the diner, then at him. "I didn't scan the parking lot. I didn't think about where the door was. I just pulled in." He looked at her. "That's the first time in 6 months," she said, "just now." He didn't say anything because there was nothing that needed to be said, and she knew it too. She looked at him for another moment with the expression he'd cataloged over weeks of corner booth coffee, the one that had too many things in it at once, and then she got in her car. He watched the car until the taillights disappeared onto Route 89. Then he stood in the parking lot alone for a while longer, looking at the dark diner, and he thought about the first time he'd seen her come in, back to the walleyes on the door, afraid of something she never explained. He thought about refilling her coffee without being asked. He thought about the 4 weeks that had led to the one night that had led to the last 3 weeks, that had led to everything after. He thought about how invisible he had been, and how much he had seen from inside that invisibility, and how none of what he'd seen had required him to be anyone other than what he was. He thought about what Victor had said in the hospital room in the dark before dawn, "You are a stabilizing force in a world built on chaos." He hadn't understood it then. He was starting to understand it now, not as a compliment, as a description of a function. The thing that holds steady in a room that's spinning. The thing that introduces one true direction when every other direction is noise. Not because of strength or training or superior knowledge, but because of a specific quality of attention and a willingness to move toward what was right without knowing in advance whether it would land correctly. He'd always had that. He'd had it working late shifts in a roadside diner, reading truckers and regulars in the specific body language of people who were afraid of something they couldn't name. He'd had it sitting with his sick mother in the small hours, finding the thing in the day that was okay without pretending the day was fine. He'd had it in every moment that had led to the next moment that had led to this parking lot. He hadn't known it was something. He'd just been doing it. He pulled his jacket tighter against the cold and turned away from the dark building and walked to his own car. A car that was new, or rather new to him, a second-hand sedan that Victor had arranged with characteristic directness after the bicycle situation, saying only that Ethan needed reliable transportation and that the matter was closed. He'd argued briefly and then let it go because the bicycle was genuinely gone and the argument was going nowhere. He drove home. His mother was awake, which she often was at this hour, and she had made tea, which was her version of keeping her hands busy while her mind worked on something. She looked at him when he came in and said, "How was it?" "Smaller than I expected," he said. "Things usually are," she said. He sat down with her and had tea, and they talked about ordinary things for a while: her Tuesday appointment, the medication schedule, a show she'd been watching that she thought he'd like. And for the first time in 3 weeks, the ordinary felt not like a reprieve from something, but like a thing that was itself worth having. Not survival, not a holding pattern between emergencies, just his mother and tea and a quiet house and everything that was going to come next still being ahead of him. That was enough. He was realizing, considerably more than enough. Carver called on a Friday morning 17 days after the warehouse. Ethan was at school, actually in class, actually taking notes, which had started to feel possible again, in a way it hadn't during the compressed weeks of safe houses and federal meetings. He stepped into the hallway to take the call. "Walsh gave up the judges," Carver said. "2 of them. Documented payments going back 4 years. We've passed it to the DOJ and Inspector General's office, which is now running its own independent investigation." A pause. "The trafficking network is formally dismantled. The crossing points are under federal oversight. The officials we've arrested are looking at federal charges that are going to stick." Another pause. "It's done, Ethan. The Reaper operation is done." Ethan stood in the school hallway with his back against the wall and his phone to his ear and said, "The families from the warehouse." 17 families, Carver said. 43 individuals, all accounted for, all receiving services. The Refugee Advocacy Organization is working their cases. It's going to be a long road for each of them, but they're on a road. He paused. "I thought you'd want to know that specifically." "Thank you," Ethan said. "Thank you for telling me." "One more thing," Carver said. "Mercer's full cooperation agreement was finalized this morning. He's giving us everything: the financial structure, the operational network, the names he was protecting. In exchange, he gets a reduced sentence, not immunity." He paused. He asked in the cooperation meeting who the kid was, the diner kid. He said, and I want to be accurate here, he said he needed to understand what exactly had gone wrong with his intelligence. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "What did you tell him?" "I told him nothing had gone wrong with his intelligence," Carver said. "I told him his intelligence was perfectly accurate. He just hadn't accounted for the specific kind of person you are." Ethan looked at the hallway around him. A group of students walked past, loud backpacks bouncing, completely unaware of and uninterested in the phone call happening against the wall. Ordinary life flowing past, indifferent and continuous. "What kind of person is that?" Ethan said. Carver was quiet for a moment. "The kind that doesn't calculate before they move," he said. "The kind that moves first and turns out to be right." He paused. "It's rarer than you'd think." The bell rang. Ethan said goodbye to Carver and went back to class. He sat in his shot and opened his notebook and looked at the notes he'd been taking before the call. The lecture was about the New Deal, about the specific conditions that produce systemic change, about the relationship between crisis and the possibility of reform. He wrote down what the teacher was saying. He kept writing. He stayed until the bell rang again. And outside in the hallway, the school kept moving around him, loud, ordinary, alive. And somewhere across the state, a man named Kane Mercer was in federal custody answering questions. And somewhere in Tucson, a school teacher named Philip Garrett had made a phone call that had changed the shape of what justice was possible. And somewhere in an office, Carver was building the record that would hold the structure of what had happened in a warehouse on a cold Saturday night, hold it in language and evidence and testimony so that it could not be undone. And Ethan Cole went to his next class, and his next, And at 3 o'clock, he walked out through the front entrance, not the gymnasium exit, the front entrance, the ordinary one into the afternoon light. The dinner happened on a Tuesday. Victor had chosen a restaurant in Scottsdale that was quiet and good, without being the kind of place that made a statement about itself. The kind of restaurant that understood its job was to be the backdrop for whatever conversation was happening at the table rather than the centerpiece of the experience. He arrived first, which Ethan would later understand was characteristic. Victor always arrived first to any room he intended to be in, because arriving first was a form of control that looked like courtesy. Ethan came with his mother. Claire had dressed carefully for this, which he noticed and didn't comment on because she'd asked him twice in the car what Victor was like, and he'd given her honest answers and watched her process those answers with the particular composure of a woman who had spent years making peace with situations that were outside the range of what she'd planned for. When she saw Victor stand up from the table to greet them, she looked at him for a moment with the direct reading attention that Ethan recognized as her own version of what he did. The rapid assessment, the search for what was true beneath the surface presentation. Victor extended his hand. "Mrs. Cole." "Claire," his mother said and shook it. Something in Victor's expression shifted, not quite softening, because Victor Sinclair's face didn't soften in any conventional sense, but something in the register changed, like he was recalibrating. Ava was already seated. She stood when they approached, and she and Claire looked at each other, and then Claire did something that surprised everyone, including Ethan. She pulled Ava into a brief, decisive embrace, the kind that says, "I know what you went through," without requiring the sentence. Ava stood very still for a moment, then hugged back. They sat down. The first 10 minutes were navigated with the careful politeness of four people from very different worlds, finding the conversational terrain they shared, which turned out to be more than any of them had expected. Victor asked Claire about her condition with a directness that was not unkind, not the hedged euphemistic version that most people used, but a straight question that treated her as someone capable of a straight answer. She gave him one. He listened the way he did everything, with complete attention. Ava talked to Ethan in the low parallel conversation that ran alongside the larger one, the way it had always run, since the diner sentences that were shorter than they needed to be, because they'd built up enough shared context that shorter was enough. "She's exactly like you said," Ava said, watching Claire talk to Victor. "What did I say is stronger than she looks?" He watched his mother hold Victor Sinclair's gaze without flinching, while she described 3 years of medication management and insurance battles and the specific bureaucratic cruelty of a healthcare system that treated chronic illness as a series of individual episodes rather than a continuous lived reality. Victor was nodding, not the performative nodding of someone waiting for their turn to speak, the actual nodding of someone who was taking in information and filing it. "He respects her," Ethan said. "He respects people who carry hard things without complaint," Ava said. "It's probably the thing he values most." She paused. "Next to loyalty." "And she has both," Ethan said. Ava looked at him. "Yes," she said. "She does." The food came. The conversation deepened in the way that happens when four people have collectively been through something that resists ordinary description and decide by unspoken consensus that ordinary description is no longer what's required. Victor put his fork down at one point and looked at Ethan across the table and said, "I owe you something." Ethan looked up. "You don't." "I do," Victor said. "Not money, not protection. Those were necessities, not debts. I owe you honesty about something I've been thinking about since the warehouse." He paused. He chose his words the way he always did, with deliberate care, each one carrying its weight. "When I gave you that weapon, I told you it was a choice. Your choice. But I want to be honest with you about what I was also doing." The table was quiet. Claire had stopped eating. Ava was watching her father. "I was testing you," Victor said. "Not because I didn't trust you, because I needed to know for myself with certainty that the read I'd taken on you from the beginning was accurate. That the boy who jumped across that diner counter without thinking was the same person in a warehouse when the stakes were different and the choice was explicit." He held Ethan's gaze. "I needed to know you were real." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "And you're real," Victor said. It wasn't a complicated sentence. It didn't need to be. The weight of it came from who was saying it and what it cost him to say it. A man who trusted almost nothing, who had built his entire world on the understanding that most things presented as real were performances, acknowledging that he had found the exception. "Thank you for telling me," Ethan said. "Thank you for being worth telling it to," Victor said. Claire reached under the table and put her hand briefly on Ethan's knee. He felt it and didn't look at her, because if he looked at her right now, something would break open that he wasn't ready to let break open at a restaurant in Scottsdale. Ava was looking at her father with an expression Ethan had never seen on her face before. It was the expression of a daughter watching her father be exactly who she'd always needed him to be in a moment she hadn't known she needed to witness. The dinner went another hour. By the end of it, something had shifted, not dramatically, not with ceremony, but with the quiet finality of a thing that has found its right shape and settled into it. The motorcycle garage came from an idea that arrived sideways the way the best ideas tend to. It started with a conversation between Ethan and a man named Reyes 6 weeks after the warehouse. Reyes was one of Victor's chapter members. 53, 2 tours in Iraq. A laugh that arrived without warning and left the room better than it found it. He'd been one of the men at the warehouse on Saturday night, quiet and professional, and afterward he'd become one of the peripheral figures in Ethan's new geography, the people who existed in the background of the world he'd moved into without entirely choosing to. They were in Victor's chapter garage one afternoon, Ethan doing homework at a work table while Reyes worked on a transmission with the focused attention of a man who found thinking easier when his hands were doing something. And Reyes said without looking up from the engine, "You know what I miss?" "What?" Ethan said. "Having a reason to come here every day," Reyes said. "When I got back from the second tour, I was a mess. Not the kind of mess that looks like a mess from the outside, the inside kind, where you're functional but nothing connects. I found this garage and I started coming in and working on bikes, and for the first time in 2 years, my brain would just quiet down. Like the engine needed something specific, and I had to find it, and there wasn't room for anything else." Ethan looked up from his textbook. "What happened?" "I got better," Reyes said simply. "Took a few years. The garage was most of it." He looked at the engine for a moment. "There are guys I know who never found that. Coming back without finding the thing that quiets everything down, that's how you lose people. Not all at once. Slowly." Ethan thought about that conversation for 3 days. He thought about what Carver had said about having a head for things. He thought about what Victor had said about being a stabilizing force. He thought about what he'd told Ava in the safe house kitchen, "I keep moving. If I stop moving, I think too much." He thought about a garage, about broken machines that needed specific things found in them, about the particular silence of concentrated work. He went to Victor. "A garage," he said, "and for veterans, specifically for guys coming back who need the thing Reyes described, the work that quiets the noise. Not therapy, not a program, not a structured intervention, just a space with bikes and tools and people who understand what it is to carry something you can't put down." Victor looked at him. "You want to build this?" "I want to figure out if it's possible to build this," Ethan said. "I'm 17. I don't have money or property or any of the things it would actually require. But I think it's right," he paused. "You asked me in the hospital if I understood what staying in meant. I think this is part of what it means. Not the operational part, the after part. What you build after the emergency." Victor was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Ethan started to wonder if he'd miscalculated. Then Victor said, "There's a property east of Flagstaff. I've owned it for 8 years, never done anything with it. Building on it, acreage, a lift already installed." He paused. "I'll cover the initial costs. You build the model." Ethan stared at him. "Just like that?" "Just like that," Victor said. "You think I don't recognize a good idea when I hear one? I thought you'd push back on the liability exposure alone." "I have a lawyer for liability exposure," Victor said dryly. "I don't have someone who thinks the way you think. That's rarer." He looked at him steadily. "But you run it. This is yours. I'm providing resources, not direction." "Why?" Ethan said. "Because the day you let me direct it, it becomes mine," Victor said, "and mine wouldn't be the same thing." The garage opened 4 months later, not with ceremony. Ethan had been firm about that firm, in the way he'd learned to be firm about things that mattered, which was without aggression and without apology. It opened on a Wednesday morning with 8 guys showing up, 4 of them veterans Reyes had talked to directly, 3 from a VA outreach program that a woman named Dr. Chen had connected Ethan to after a conversation that had started with her profound skepticism and ended with her writing down the address. The eighth was Marcus from school, who had shown up to help and had no particular mechanical skill, but was, as it turned out, extremely good at organizing tools and remembering where things went, which was its own indispensable form of contribution. Reyes was there every day that first week. He didn't run anything. He worked on his own projects, talked when people came to him, left people alone when that was what they needed. He had an instinct for the difference that Ethan recognized because it matched something in himself. The second week, a man named Torres arrived. He'd heard from someone who'd heard from someone, which was how word moved in the specific communities that the garage was trying to reach. Torres was 47, had lost a leg below the knee, in Fallujah had been back for 11 years, and was still in the process of figuring out what back meant. He sat in the garage the first day and didn't touch anything. The second day, he asked Reyes a question about a carburetor. The third day, he was there before anyone else arrived, and he was still there when Ethan locked up. That was what it looked like. That was the whole thing, not dramatic, not cinematic, just a man arriving early on the third day because he had found the thing that quieted the noise. Ethan didn't tell himself he'd built something important. He told himself he'd built something that was working, which felt more accurate and also more sustainable than importance. Ava enrolled in school in January. Not Ethan's school, she chose a different district, which was the right call for reasons neither of them had to articulate. She needed a space that was entirely her own, unconnected to the events of the fall, where she could be a student rather than a story. She told Ethan about her first week in a phone call that had the slightly disbelieving quality of someone reporting on an experience they'd expected to be harder. "Nobody knows anything," she said, "about any of it. I'm just a girl who transferred in January. That's all I am to them." "Is that strange?" Ethan said. "It's extraordinary," she said, "in the most ordinary way possible." He laughed. "You're going to be fine." "I know," she said, and she said it differently than she would have said it 3 months ago, not with the defensive certainty of someone who needs to believe it, but with the quieter confidence of someone who actually does. She called him every few days. Not every day, the frequency of someone who had a life they were building and wanted to share pieces of it, not the frequency of someone who needed the call itself as a lifeline. He noticed the difference and felt in noticing it a specific kind of relief. She was becoming someone who called because she wanted to. That was exactly what should be happening. He called her back. He told her about the garage, about Torres arriving early on the third day, about Dr. Chen agreeing to make monthly visits for informal conversations that were not therapy in any official sense, but were also not nothing. He told her about Mrs. Delgado submitting his college application materials with the specific satisfaction of a woman who had been waiting 4 years for this particular task. He told her about his mother's Tuesday appointment, which had gone well. Better than the last one. Better than several of the ones before it. "She's improving," Ava said. "Stabilizing," Ethan said. Which with lupus is the version of improving that's actually available. She's not getting worse. And she's lighter. Something about the last few months. She said to me last week that she feels like she raised someone who knows how to move in the world and that she can put some weight down now. Ava was quiet for a moment. "That's beautiful," she said. She cried a little when she said it. I pretended not to notice. "Of course you did," Ava said. The gathering in Nevada was Victor's idea, and it was larger than Ethan had expected. He'd known it was a significant event, an annual gathering of multiple chapters writers from across several states, the kind of assembly that in Victor's world represented a formal occasion rather than a casual one. He hadn't fully understood what that meant in scale until they arrived. Hundreds of bikes, riders of every age, every background, united by the specific gravity of an organization that had existed long enough to develop its own traditions in its own weight. They set up in a fairgrounds outside Las Vegas, and the air had the particular quality of a large gathering where everyone present understands that their presence itself is a statement. Ethan had come because Victor had asked him to come, and because saying no to Victor Sinclair's invitations had become something he did when the occasion called for it, but not reflexively because the invitations were never pointless. He still didn't entirely know what this particular occasion called for. He found out on the second afternoon. Victor gathered the chapter leadership in a large open area, and when he spoke with the particular cadence that Ethan had learned to identify as his public register, the voice that carried that had been developed over years of being heard and believed in rooms where both of those things mattered. He talked about the reapers. He talked about the operation about Mercer, about the trafficking network that had been using the same corridors that riders moved through the same territory, the same roads. He talked about what had been in those containers. He talked about the choice that had been made in a warehouse and about who had made it. He said Ethan's name. And then he said a 17-year-old boy from a roadside diner who had never been in a room like that warehouse in his life held a weapon and chose law over blood, in a room full of men who could have told him 50 reasons why blood was faster. He chose the slower thing, the harder thing, the thing that actually holds. The gathering was quiet, hundreds of people in the outdoor space, and it was quiet the way things get quiet when a room has decided something without having a vote. That choice is the reason 43 people came out of containers alive and went into federal care instead of wherever they were being delivered, Victor said. That choice is the reason the officials who were protecting Mercer are now facing federal charges. That choice is the reason this territory is cleaner tonight than it was 6 months ago. He looked at Ethan. "Stand up," he said. Ethan stood. He didn't know what else to do. He stood in front of several hundred people who were looking at him with the specific attention of people who have just been told something they're deciding how to hold. And he felt not afraid, not proud, not any of the things he might have predicted, just present. Just entirely specifically there. Nobody cheered. That wasn't the register of this gathering. What happened was something quieter and more substantial, a murmur that moved through the crowd like a wave through deep water, low and collective, the sound of acknowledgement. Victor said loud enough for the people near them to hear, "You don't have to be one of us. You're something else. But you're welcome here." Ethan looked at him. "Thank you," he said. Later, after the formal part of the gathering had broken into smaller conversations, and the afternoon light was doing its Nevada thing of turning everything a specific shade of gold, Victor found Ethan standing at the edge of the fairgrounds. They stood together for a moment without speaking, watching the riders move through the space, hearing the low collective sound of an organization that knew what it was. Then Victor said, "Are you happy?" It was a simple question. Ethan had been waiting for it in some wordless way since the hospital room before dawn, since the kitchen table with the chemistry textbook, since the parking lot of Harlan's road stop. He thought about it honestly. He thought about the garage east of Flagstaff and Torres arriving early on the third day. He thought about his mother putting weight down. He thought about Ava saying I didn't scan the exits in the parking lot with something like wonder in her voice. He thought about Marcus organizing tools with his particular gift for remembering where things went. He thought about chemistry tests and Mrs. Delgado's college applications and Carver calling on a Friday morning to say it's done. He thought about the jump, the moment before it, the absence of thought, the rightness of the landing. "I think I'm getting there," he said. Victor nodded. Not a dismissal of the answer's incompleteness, an acceptance of it, an acknowledgement that getting there was its own honest and sufficient answer, that it described a state of motion that was better than arrival, because it meant the direction was still forward. They stood together for another few minutes in the Nevada afternoon. Two people from entirely different worlds who had found in the specific crucible of the last 5 months a common language built not from background or affiliation or shared history, but from the simpler and more durable material of what each of them had chosen to do when the moment required choosing. Then Victor said, "Your garage, Dr. Chen's program. Tell me what you need to expand it." Ethan looked at him. "I thought you said it was mine to run." "It is," Victor said. "I'm asking what you need. That's different from directing." Ethan thought about it. Another lift, better ventilation system, and someone with actual formal training and peer support work who can be there regularly, not just monthly. Done, and I'll make some calls Monday," Victor said without hesitation. "You know people in peer support work," Ethan said. "I know people in everything," Victor said. "That's the job." Ethan almost laughed. "Okay." "And Ethan," Victor turned to look at him directly. "College. Whatever you're thinking about doing law advocacy, something adjacent. You do that. Don't let this," he gestured at the fairgrounds, at the garage, at the implicit weight of everything they'd built together. "Don't let this become the ceiling. Let it be the floor." Ethan looked at him. "That's surprisingly good advice." "I'm a surprisingly complex man," Victor said mildly. This time Ethan did laugh, and Victor very slightly almost smiled. Ava found him at the edge of the fairgrounds an hour later. She'd come for the gathering but had spent most of it moving through the crowd, with the particular ease of someone who had grown up in this world and knew its rhythms without being entirely of it. She came and stood beside him the same way she'd stood beside him in the parking lot of Harlan's road stop, shoulder to shoulder, looking outward the posture of two people who had learned to be comfortable in each other's silence. He asked you if you were happy, she said. Were you listening? I was nearby, she said, which was not a denial. And I wanted to hear your answer, she said. I didn't already know what it was going to be. He looked at her. That's new. I know, she said. I usually know. She looked out at the fairgrounds. I think you're surprising me more as I know you better, which is backwards from how it usually works. Usually the more you know someone, the less surprising they are, he said. Exactly, she said. But you keep finding different ways to be exactly what I should have expected and somehow didn't. He looked at the riders moving through the fairgrounds, the gold afternoon light, the sound of engines and conversation, and the low collective presence of hundreds of people who knew what they were. I've been thinking about something, Ava said. Okay. About what you said in the safe house, about your mother finding the thing in the day that was okay, the coffee being good even in the worst room. She paused. I've been doing that, consciously at first like a practice, looking for the thing that's okay. The class that was interesting, the conversation that landed right the moment where I wasn't watching exits. She stopped. It's starting to happen without thinking about it. Ethan looked at her. Your mother, he said. She turned. What? You said your dad told you she had that quality, finding the good thing in a room full of bad things. He held her gaze. You've got it too. Ava looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face, not quite tears, but the territory adjacent to them, the place where something true has landed and the body hasn't yet decided what to do with it. I didn't know that, she said, very quietly. You've always had it, he said. You had it in the diner. You kept coming back to a roadside diner on a highway because something about ordinary felt safer than anything else you'd tried. That's finding the good thing. He paused. You just didn't know you were doing it. She was still looking at him. Then she looked down, looked out, looked back. Ethan, she said. Yeah, I'm glad you were working that night. Me too, he said. She reached out and took his hand. Not dramatically, the same way she'd put her hand over his at the kitchen table, brief and clear, and without performance. But this time she didn't take it back. They stood at the edge of the Nevada fairgrounds in the gold late afternoon light, holding on, watching everything move. 3 months later, Ethan Cole received his first college acceptance letter. He was in the garage east of Flagstaff when it came through on his phone, sitting at the work table with the same textbook he'd been failing to read for an hour because Torres had asked him a question about his application process, and they'd been talking for 45 minutes. Instead, Torres, sitting on an overturned crate with a wrench in his hand, he'd forgotten he was holding Ethan leaning back in his chair with his phone on the table. The notification came in. He looked at it, read it twice. University of Arizona School of Law, pre-law program. Full need-based scholarship. Fall enrollment. He sat with it for a moment. Just sat with it and let it be real. Torres looked at him. Good news. Yeah, Ethan said. Good news. Torres nodded. Went back to his wrench. Didn't ask for details, which was the right call, and also characteristic of a man who understood that some things were private and some things were communal, and the wisdom was in knowing the difference. Ethan called his mother. She picked up on the second ring and he said, University of Arizona, full scholarship. She made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Then she said in the voice she used when she was trying very hard to hold something together, Ethan. I know, he said. Your father. She stopped, started again. You did this without any of the things he was supposed to give you. I had you, Ethan said. That was enough. That was more than enough. She cried then. He let her. He sat in the garage with his phone and listened to his mother cry, the specific tears of someone who had carried something heavy for a very long time and has just been given permission to put part of it down. When she stopped, she said, come home for dinner. I'll be there by 6, he said. He hung up, sat for another moment, looked at the garage around him, at the lifts, at the tools organized in the way Marcus had organized them, at the 3 men working quietly at different stations, at the late afternoon light, coming through the high windows, at the ordinary, extraordinary fact of this place existing at all. He called Ava. She picked up immediately the way she always did with him now without the careful calculation of someone managing access. University of Arizona, he said. Full scholarship. Law program. Silence. Then I knew it. You knew it. I absolutely knew it. Her voice was bright in the way it got when something had happened that she'd been waiting for. I've known since the federal meeting. Carver basically told you with his face. Carver said I had a decent head for things. From Carver, that's a full endorsement, she said. Ethan, law school. Pre-law, he said. For now. Don't minimize it. I'm not minimizing, I'm being accurate. You're deflecting, she said, which you do when something matters enough to be scary. Stop it and just be happy. He stopped. He let it be what it was, large and real, and his earned without anyone handing it to him, built from the specific material of 4 years of late shifts and his mother's example, and the education of watching people at their most honest in the 22 days that had started with a gunshot through a diner window. I'm happy, he said. Good, she said. You should be. He could hear her smiling through the phone. He could have told her that he could hear it, and she would have known exactly what he meant. They had built enough language now that the inexact things had become precise. Dinner Sunday, she said. Sunday, he agreed. I'll tell my dad. He'll make a thing of it. He makes a thing of everything. He makes a thing of things he cares about, she corrected. There's a difference. Fair, he said. He hung up. Sat in the garage for another 10 minutes, letting the last of the day's light come through the high windows and fall across the work table. Torres packed up at the far end of the garage, moving with the specific ease of a man whose body had stopped fighting itself, whose hands knew where to put things. He nodded at Ethan on his way out. Ethan nodded back. The garage emptied. Ethan stayed for a few minutes in the quiet of it, in the smell of oil and metal, in the particular clean smell of work done. He thought about the boy who had been invisible, the boy who had refilled coffee without being asked and cleared a corner booth on late nights and read the parking lot without knowing why. The boy who had no future he could picture and no floor solid enough to build from. He thought about what that boy had done, not the extraordinary version, not the story Victor had told at the Nevada gathering, but the actual version, the one that had no witnesses. The 4 years of showing up, the homework between shifts, the promise to Mrs. Delgado, the steady choosing over and over of the harder thing when the easier thing was available. He thought about his mother saying, I feel like I raised someone who knows how to move in the world. He locked up the garage, walked to his car, drove toward home in the last of the Arizona light past the stretch of Route 89 where Harlan's Road Stop Diner still sat dark, and closed past the spot in the road where headlights would have swept across a window on a cold October night, past everything that had been and everything that had changed. He didn't slow down. He didn't stop. He drove forward the way he always had, the way he always would, because the road ahead was real, and the work wasn't finished, and the direction was clear, and that was everything a person actually needed to keep moving. Ethan Cole had been invisible for 17 years. He had stopped a bullet, started a garage, and chosen law over blood in a room that expected him to choose otherwise. He had held on when the natural thing was to let go, and let go when holding on would have cost something he was not willing to pay. He was not invisible anymore. He never would be again. And the world, because of it, was measurably better than it had been the night he jumped, not because one boy became someone worth seeing, but because being seen had never been what he was after. He had been after the right thing in the right moment with everything he had. He had found it. He had done it. And the life that followed was proof of what one true decision made without hesitation can build in its wake, solid, real, and entirely his own.